leeway to some of our counselors that we're still waiting to have online, and we will get underway very shortly.
Great turnout.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Is Councillor Morse still here, or did she just turn her video off?
I'm here. I was just
Oh, great.
too distracting. I was running around getting things I didn't want. And I'll have to turn my video off in a little while because I haven't had anything to eat yet.
That's no problem. I'm just gonna move you up here to the top of my screen. And have we heard from Councillor Jurgensen at all?
I have not, no.
Okay. Or Councillor Getty?
Thought she had indicated she wasn't available.
You are muted, Councillor Fast.
Judy Getty was just in another meeting with me until 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago now. So I'll just check my email because we both left around the same time, that other Zoom.
Okay, well, it is 8 after. We do have quorum, so I will call this meeting to order just to be respectful of the public's time, as well as our chairs and councillors who are here as well. So thank you, everybody, for attending. This is quite the turnout, and it speaks to, I think, the engagement of our local advisory committees, as well as our communities who are really wanting to be engaged and know what's happening in this process. So just by way of starting the meeting, I will acknowledge that with gratitude that we are participating in this meeting from our homes and our works on this traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, whose people have been stewards of this land and these waters surrounding Naquelahim, Bowen Island. And it also feels prescient to note that we're gathered here today as a governance body that has the privilege to chart its own course with respect to water. And this is a right that is still not available to many Indigenous communities across our nation who suffer from a lack of clean, reliable drinking water. And I'd just like to take a silent moment to recognize this as we gather here today. Thank you, and welcome to the Bowen Island Municipality Committee of the Whole meeting of December 7th, 2022, with the joint chairs of the Bluewater Park, King Edward Bay, and Bowen Bay Local Advisory Committees. And thank you for joining. I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and the chair of this meeting. On your screen, I'd like to introduce some of the other elected members of Bowen Island's Council here. And folks, as I call out your names, perhaps you can raise your hands. I have a feeling that you may be scattered all over Zoom as my attendees stretch 3 pages here. And by raising your hand, you'll bounce yourselves to the top of the screen so members of the public can see who you are. So here tonight we have Councillor Sue Ellen Fast, an Islands trustee, Councillor Alison Morse, who also serves as the council liaison on all of the local advisory committees, Councillor John Saunders, Councillor Tim Wake, and some of our the chairs of our local advisory committees. We have Chair John O'Donnell from Bowen Bay, Chair Brian Thomas Peter from King Edward Bay, and Chair Rob Dufty from Bluewater Park. Also on the call this evening, our members of our professional staff, our corporate officer, Sophie Insignia, our chief administrative officer, Liam Edwards, and our chief financial officer, Kristen Watson. Sorry, I'm chasing you all over my screen here. So look at this Brady bunch that we've got here on the screen.
Mayor Leonard, our director of engineering, also just joined, Patrick Graham, too.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. I didn't see him on the screen.
Mexico, so.
And so did Judy Getty, Councillor.
Well, and Councillor Getty here is here as well. Fantastic. So this meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public speak during the public comment and question and answer periods, portions of this meeting, which there are extensive time dedicated to, your presence and voice will be included in the permanent recording, which will be available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca and on our YouTube channel where it's being live streamed right now. So before seeking to adopt the agenda for the evening, I'd just like to make a few comments on meeting procedure, which is governed by our procedure bylaw, and this is a unique meeting. So it's our first meeting fully on Zoom with council, and additionally with the joint chairs, as well as the public fully present here. So councillors and chairs, because this is such a well-attended meeting, during the meeting to be recognized, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, particularly if I don't see you waving your hand like this. The Zoom option is best because it just bumps you to the top of the screen where you can be recognized. I'd ask members of the public, please keep yourselves muted during the public until the public comment or Q&A portions of the meeting, which our corporate officer will be helping to manage. And there is a public comments section at the start of this meeting. And if there's statements there that you'd like to make, that's fantastic. Although I'll also note that there's a significant portion of this meeting dedicated to question and answer after the chief financial officer and the LAC chairs have had the opportunity to present. And the LAC chairs are here to speak both to the issues in your neighborhood, which they've been advocating for with respect to water, for council's clarity as we seek to chart a path of where it is that we want to go, including your respective histories. And I've asked that they also speak to the question of where is it that water systems should end up? If we imagine our water systems in 2050, what do they look like on the west side? Because that's ultimately the decision that council has to start making here today, because there is a cost burden and some relationships that need to be worked on. And that's really what I think council wanted to get clarity on as we had this committee of the whole meeting. The ultimate goal of this meeting after our presentations and Q&A is to have a resolution for council's approval at our next meeting on December 12th. So we're here to hear what you have to say, have your questions answered, and then ultimately find common ground for our common future together here on the West Side. And I'd really like to thank everyone for what it's taken to get to this meeting. So I've watched our staff present at many meetings, taking the comments, questions, and concerns of the community, to our LAC chairs and members who I know absolutely passionately care about their neighborhoods and have advocated for them. And there's been a ton of work and engagement done in the community by our local advisory committees in getting here today and in getting the public here today. And I just want to thank our chairs and vice chairs and committees in general for helping to lead that engagement. So without further ado, the full agenda is for this evening's meeting is available on bowenislandmunicipality.ca. And with all that said, I will look for a motion to please adopt the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Morse. Seconded by Councillor Fast. Any objections? The agenda is adopted. Moving to Section 2, public comments. To the corporate officer, do we have any public comments this evening?
Yes, we have Trevor Hodge, looks like has raised his hand, and he also submitted a written submission.
Fantastic. Yes, I see that in the agenda package. And Trevor, you are our only public comment today, and I know that you did put a lot of time into the presentation. So feel free to take the time as needed to speak your piece here.
Thank you, Andrew. Sarah and I have included a presentation with your agenda package, and we'd certainly invite every one of you to read it. It's our perspective as a Bluewater homeowner. And from what we can tell, there are two key considerations for council. The first consideration is whether the proposed integrated West Side water system is in fact feasible. An engineering solution exists, but the people solution doesn't. Some communities do not want to be part of an integrated West Side water system. It's completely understandable. It provides no value to them. In addition, the current governance approach is broken. Some would say dysfunctional, and as is, it's going to continue to fail going forward. So to ensure future success, other governance options will definitely need to be considered. The second consideration that's really before you as a key consideration is how much to borrow. And let's be clear, Bluewater homeowners know that they need to upgrade their water system. Phase 1 includes the replacement of all sections of the Bluewater Park water mains where leaks have occurred over the past decade. 4 leaks in total. However, the remaining water mains in Bluewater are stable and don't leak. Certainly not in the last 10 years. There's no immediate requirement for phase 2. Replacing perfectly functioning water mains does not make sense, especially when borrowing costs are at a premium. If you want the referendum to be successful, a win-win, then I'd respectfully ask that you trust your staff and follow their recommendation to focus only on phase 1. Andrew, thank you for the opportunity to be heard. It's truly appreciated.
You're very welcome, Mr. Hodge. Thank you for presenting and for your informative information package that you sent for the benefit of councillors. It's appreciated. To the corporate officer, any other public comments?
I don't have any other hands raised in the participant window, so.
Okay, great. And then as again to the public, there is an extensive Q&A portion of the meeting slated after the staff and chair presentation. So there's lots of time to have your questions asked and answered and to be heard. So we will move along to section 3, new business, and item 3.1, the Bluewater Park water system replacement loan authorization bylaw, and I will hand it over to our CFO, Kristen Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. So through the chair, I'll just take a moment just to quickly reiterate the project and the phases for the benefit of council and for the public. Phase 1 includes upgrades to the wells in Bowen Bay. The upgrade will increase water supply production to about 221,000 liters per day. And this is the amount of water that's about equal to the water that can be expected to be required during the highest peak periods in the summer in both Bowen Bay and Bluewater Park. The cost of the well upgrade in Bowen Bay is about $715,000. And the second well upgrades that are being contemplated as part of phase 1 are an upgrade to the wells in the existing Bluewater Park well field at a cost of about $75,000. The second part of phase 1 includes water main distribution. It's anticipated the water, about 810 meters of water main distribution to be replaced along Windjammer and Spyglass and Captain's Way. The cost of the, sorry, I just want to make sure I get the right number. The cost of the water main replacement distribution is expected to be about $980,000. So altogether, the two parts of phase 1, the water main plus the well upgrades, are expected to cost about $1.77 million. Phase 2 of water main upgrades includes an additional 1,210 meters of water main replacement with an estimated cost of about $1.9 million. Sorry, $1.38 million. And the third phase is the remaining 1,500 meters of water main replacement at a cost of approximately $1.9 million. So the last potential piece of the project includes the replacement of the reservoir, the water tank reservoir, with a new 650,000 liter water tank. And the price tag for replacement of the water tank is estimated to be approximately $1.6 million. Now, all phases of the project would require borrowing. There's about $75,000 of funds in the Bluewater Park Reserve. There was a staff recommendation attached to the November 28th report that went to council that recommended that council go forward with phase 1 of the project. And this was based on the discussion that we had at the Bluewater Park Community Information Meeting that was held at October 26th. That was the number that was socialized at that time. I understand that since that meeting, there's been discussion at Bowen Bay local service area meetings and King Edward Bay local services area meetings, as well as at the council table, that perhaps council should also consider phase 2 of the water distribution pipe replacement project as well, which would bring the total amount of the project together to $3.1 million. The cost to Bluewater Park, each property in Bluewater Park, for the 1.7 million is about $725 per year per parcel. That is proposed that be borrowed at 4.67% over 30 years, which was the going rate of interest. The interest rates went up again today by another 0.5%. And the cost for a $3.1 million project per parcel in Bluewater is approximately $1,323. there would be, in order to borrow those funds, there is required that assent of the Bluewater Park electors is achieved. We have two ways of going about that. We can do an outright referendum vote, which is a certain Saturday is established where everybody in Bluewater who lives in Bluewater has the opportunity to come out and vote yes or no to a question. The question would be, would you support adoption of a loan authorization bylaw in the amount of? And the task for council is to decide, is that question going to be $3.1 million or is that amount going to be $1.7 million? The second process that we have, we've undertaken one recently in Tunstall Bay to undertake the water reservoir project there. And that's, it's an assent, it's a petition process. So what the municipality would do in that case is they would post notice in the paper that the municipality intends to adopt a loan authorization bylaw in the amount of either 1.7 or 3.1. And anybody who does not support this, please provide us written notice in the prescribed form by such and such a day. So there are two ways of going about it. One is an active vote and one is only let us know if you don't support the loan authorization bylaw. We'll have more information about what method is recommended at the council meeting next week. The quick answer is the negative assent process method is quicker, would allow us probably to begin work at the end of April, whereas a full referendum would not allow work to start until at least June. And there's a more of a cost that comes with a referendum. We actually have to order ballots and we have to pay people to work on Saturdays to man the voting booths and things like that. So there is a cost probably between $5,000 and $10,000 to do an actual referendum, and a negative petition process is much less cost. It's really an administrative process and we just have to post notice in the newspaper. So those are our options for consideration that we will provide a little more detail on at the council meeting on Monday. Yeah, just certainty around the amount of the borrowing is what would be needed before council could go forward and give 3 readings to a loan authorization bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you to our CFO. Maybe what I might recommend is that we have all of the presentations first, and then we can look at questions unless council or the chairs want to ask questions of the CFO. Yes, Councillor Saunders.
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. Just one quick question, if I could, to the CFO, please. The second option, essentially the negative option billing effort. If you don't like it, let us know, sort of thing. So, what is the effect do you count the number of letters that are received and make a decision based on that, or is it an informational process and the decision has already been made?
No, there's a real threshold. So if the first of all, the corporate officer will have to determine what the total number of eligible properties are in that assent area. So we know there's property owners as well as properties with improvements would be entitled to vote. So I believe the number is 153 properties. So 50%, the threshold is 50%. If we were to receive negative notice from 50% of the properties that represented 50% of the assessed value within that area, then that would be enough to stop the process, and it would fail at that point.
Thank you.
Councillor Morris.
Right. No, I tried to stop on video. So if it failed, then you can then go and do the full referendum process after that?
We could.
Yeah, so the timing of doing, if it failed and then you had to do the referendum, that would take quite a bit longer than just doing the referendum from the start.
True, but they both require that 50% threshold. So it's the same threshold either way. I think initially we thought that it was a 10% threshold. So the threshold to not allow the process to go forward was a lot lower. But we just checked with the ministry and did a little more looking into it, and it's 50%. So it is the same threshold that would approve a referendum.
Or it's 50% that would have to say, no, we don't want this. And then we'd have to go to a referendum. And I thought there was something about dollar value of properties in there as well from the Tunstall Bay one.
Yes, that's right. 50% of the properties that represented 50% or more of the assessed value.
Okay,
A two-part test.
all right.
To our CAO.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just responding to Councillor Morris's question and just adding a bit of clarity. I think that if the petition against approach failed, I wouldn't recommend moving to a referendum because you would have received sufficient voters to have a failed referendum. Rather, it'd be looking at what was the question that was being asked, and would you like to reconsider the question?
Any other questions from councillors or LAC chairs for the CFO? Seeing none. Oh, yes. Looks like Councillor Saunders. Well, we've heard from Councillor Saunders already, so I will go to Chair Dufty.
Question to you, Kristen. Would it be possible to have two questions, or would you just focus in on one question for either way of doing this? Curiosity.
I believe in a counter petition process, you would only be able to ask one. It would be, nobody would know which one they were.
Right.
Yes. I believe, and I did put the question out there to the ministry today. She said she would get back to me later this week, so I'll have the answer for Monday. Could we ask two separate questions? I believe CAO Edwards, you did indicate that you had seen that before, or that was possible to ask two separate questions in the referendum process.
Within a referendum, you can ask two questions. It can confuse and confound the issue, so it's got to be really crisp and really clear. But you can in a counter petition, it's not really possible.
Any other questions for the CFO? Seeing none, we'll move to 3.2 of the agenda, the chair presentations by the local advisory committees. And I believe Chair O'Donnell and Chair Thomas Peter are delivering a joint presentation. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure that we agreed that. I think we put a joint paper in, but I think
okay.
They need to speak for itself.
Sure. So we'll go by alphabetical order then, and I will start with Chair O'Donnell from Bowen Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll keep my presentation short, as I think we have presented a pretty thorough presentation paper, and I'm hoping there will be a fulsome dialogue at the end of the question and answer period at the end, and we'll hear more issues from residents, staff, and council. Bowen Bay residents have spoken to me, and most are of the opinion that our system serves Bowen Bay residents well, and they do not want to see it altered. They've had a relatively stable period of use and reliable system, and so as you can probably imagine, then people are not in a rush to see a change that might affect the water delivery that they've had previously. That said, though, I certainly have had one Bowen Bay resident tell me that we've been selfish and we need to move on and share. So there is a range of opinions. But about 3 years ago, as president of the LAC, we started a process looking at this notion of sharing the water outputs on the west side. And as president of the LAC, I had agreed with the notion that Bowen Bay could share our water system output with Bluewater Park as long as the leaky or potentially leaky infrastructure in Bluewater Park was replaced. I have since learned from a number of Bowen Bay residents that they're not overly supportive of that idea, but it is something that we will just have to see what they say. Speaking to the proposed Bluewater Park boring bylaw that involves connecting to Bowen Bay, I believe more than currently failing infrastructure must be replaced. I mean, we must realize, yes, we're very lucky it could be done next year, but given processes and timing and bidding and et cetera, it's more likely going to be the following year. And then within 2 or 3 years, we could have other pipes that we didn't replace start to cause issues. So we really want to see something that will last us more than 5 years. We strongly support alternative 1, which is fixing all substandard pipes and remaining undersized water mains that may be at or near the end of service life, as they have the potential for failing in the next 5 to 10 years. I do want to throw something into the mix because certainly had an earlier presentation that people may be only wanting to support the 1.7 million, but if they not support for the 3.1 million of alternative 1, as it's too costly, then there is yet another alternative, and that would be upgrading of Bluewater wells at $75,000, replacement phase 1 of the Bluewater Park water mains at $980,000, replacement of a phase 2 remaining undersized water mains that may be at or near the end of service life for 1.38 million, and the total estimated cost then would come at 2.435, which splits the difference actually exactly half between the 1.7 and the 3.1, and so therefore Bowen Bay people, or sorry, Bluewater Park people are paying 100% for work that's been done within Bluewater Park. And that does add perhaps another $300 to what might have been the $725 cost of the original staff proposal. And also combining pipe work may result in savings through more competitive bidding, reduced consultant costs, and reduced construction costs, such as general conditions. And I think the savings would be good to have in case there are cost overruns. We also support the continued search for more wells and reliable water sources. And that may, if that has the potential of being successful, then perhaps the yet another alternative I suggested tonight might be workable. The mayor had asked us to envision the question, where should the water systems end up in 20 to 30 years from now? And going through this process, certainly when we started out, the notion was we would be all one local service area and one LAC, and all joined together, working together, pulling together, etc. But I think we've now learned that there always be three local service areas, because each area is going to have different boring timelines and they have different infrastructure needs. So we know there are always, at least for 30 years, boring of the first tranche, there's going to be separate local service areas. And then the question is, could there be some different structure than the local advisory committees? Potentially, there could be a larger board, but I think in some respects, the local advisory committees are maybe connected more to the individual water boards, because we have a number of these bylaws to come up in the next 15 years. We know Bowen Bay is going to get, into this in 5 to 10 years, maybe less. We've asked Patrick Graham, our our municipal engineer to give us further update on the condition of our pipes. But certainly we are going to see these bylaws keep coming every 3 to 5 years for probably the next 15 or 20 years. And I think the LAC system is useful in trying to internally lobby. I mean, let's face it, whether it's a negative campaign, negative letter writing, or whether it's a plebiscite vote, we do rely on discussion in the community. And I think the LAC's our chairs and the LAC boards are great to assist in that dialogue. So on that brief note, I'll end, and I do indicate, as I said, Bowen Bay does see our own infrastructure needing to be replaced, and so we can, with good conscience, give advice to our neighbors in Bluewater Park, because someone would ask, well, why should we be telling them what to do? And of course, in this case, well, we are very much part of the solution. We are going to be, if the staff recommendation or alternative number 1 is supported, then Bowen Bay's water system will be permanently linked, joined with Bluewater Park and King Edward Bay.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell. Chair Thomas Peter.
Well, I'm a bit bemused by that. That's thanks, John. You threw in a number of forks into the works to find out what's going to happen. I'd be very interested to work through in more detail what you've been saying, but as alternatives, especially the different splitting one. But as you will all know, that King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay have worked in a collaborative way to respond to this meeting or to prepare for this meeting. But what I want to do is I want to get to some principles for going forward. So in the relatively short talk I have, it's only a few minutes long, I want you to listen for themes about preservation, in contrast to provision of water. So we need to be thinking about how we preserve our infrastructure, how we preserve our sources of water, in contrast to simply thinking about how we can provide it. It's a very different psychological orientation to this problem. We also need to think about, I want you to listen for themes about transparency and the frustrations of absent transparency and how that's caused us so much difficulty. And also about longevity, I mean, how we can build resilience into the system and not just provide out of this system. How can it sustain assaults of all sorts of things like, not so much floods, but certainly earthquakes and perhaps vagaries of the weather changing, the pattern of weather changing, and also fairness. So those are the kinds of themes that I want you to be listening for as I go through some of this. But first, I want to express some appreciation, which I think is really merited. And first of all, I want to thank Mayor for setting this up and for trying to establish such a helpful tone to this meeting. That's very helpful indeed. But I'd also like to thank the municipality for supporting the King Edward Bay resolution at the last council meeting, which prioritized for the very first time the preservation of King Edward Bay resources above water provision. I think that's a critical change, and I think it's critical for all. I think we should all be doing that. All of our water systems should be thinking about how do we shift from provision to preservation. This has been an abiding concern for King Edward Bay since it was formed, and it's been kind of it's been the understory, as it were, to many of our anxieties and concerns that we've expressed. Now, but we recognize also that we're central geographically to the west side, but that brings with it an anxiety. We're anxious that because we're in the middle, as it were, that it doesn't come with a compromise of the resources that we have had a singular financial liability for. And that's a really critical thing. It's defined by our bylaws. It doesn't matter who owns it. Municipality owns it. That's never been a question. What really matters is the limitations placed on that, on the use of that resource and the product of that resource and the liabilities for that resource, which fall squarely and exclusively with the people in that local service area. I also want to thank Liam and Patrick and others for putting so much time into resolving the problem. Experienced particularly by Bluewater, and I'd say also Rob. I'd like to extend a public thank you to you for being the first person to reach across the Great Divide and try and get some discussions going. That was terrific, and it did actually. It's a great pity that we didn't get to an MOU in the end. We were very, very close. It's a great pity we didn't do it. But I have to say, having said that, much of this effort could have been avoided, and by attending to the history of and learning the lessons therein of the history of our water. Now, I'm going to resist reminding Council just how the municipality of old, not the present individuals, allowed the problem to develop over the last 15 years. I'll draw your attention perhaps to the history document that I wrote on behalf of King Edward Bay on the 18th of July, 2019, which is, I think, in wide circulation. But if you don't have a copy, I'm happy to send it to you. But I'll say no more about the history. But I only ask that the spectrum of failings in that process, and there are lots of them, from denial of reality, ignoring bylaws completely, nurturing misinformation, administrative belligerence at one end of the spectrum, and seeking easy fix, short-term solutions, pragmatic solutions at the other end. I hope these things don't find their way into the resolution of the present crisis. I mean, that's the kind of key issue. If we're going to, let's ignore the history. For heaven's sake, let's not ignore the lessons of that history. There must be transparency and focus on long-term outcomes that are fair for everyone. And remember too, I think there's something that gets lost with the challenges that our long-suffering municipality staff members have, that we're not here to resolve the problems that the municipality are facing. It sounds a bit odd, but we're actually here to resolve the problem that Bluewater Park community is facing. These are friends and our neighbors, and there's real financial anxiety that we're acutely aware of and never stopped being aware of in all this time. The problems have, though, spilled over into King Edward Bay for a decade, and now they are going to enmesh Bowen Bay. I'm not sure how they think about that, really. So I'll tell you what, a key goal that I have never heard expressed, and I wish somebody had said it, and I wish we should abide by it even now. And a key goal should have been to prevent the spreading of the damage that had already been done in Bluewater Park to their system to neighboring local service areas. Why was that never a goal, never an objective of the municipality? It simply has not been in anyone's mind to stop that damage being spread. And I'm really disappointed about that. It would have been very consistent with the bylaws had we done that, but the bylaws have been not really considered as of primary importance. If we had been minded to preserve the resources we have rather than simply draw on them, we would not now see King Edward Bay wells under threat or Bowen Bay being pulled into this. And I'm absolutely certain about that. It's obviously, having said all this, it's not for us to tell Bluewater Park how or how much to invest in their water infrastructure. I'm reluctant to get into that at all. But it is for us to encourage Bluewater, this meeting and this council, to shape the proposal and make decisions that effectively reduce the risk to the resources that we in King Edward Bay have invested in. And central to this encouragement for King Edward Bay is to ask the priority for Bluewater Park be finding new water sources to meet its own needs. And if we were to do that, it would change everything. And there's lots of unexplored opportunities for that I haven't seen discussed within the municipality. Now we've seen, just to illustrate some of this, we've seen the importance of this last summer when the last remaining Bluewater pump failed, and virtually all of the water Bluewater was drawn from King Edward Bay. And as a result, the new well in Arbutus Ridge was demonstrated to be more frail than we anticipated under that kind of pressure. It didn't help that the main Bowen Bay well pump failed also. That was problematic and caused everyone to feel very anxious. Meanwhile, several years ago, King Edward Bay well, that TW01, was showing signs of failing, being unable to recharge at the rate anticipated. It was aging, that was what was happening. It was aging prematurely because of the strain of the demand on from Bluewater. Now, if either of the Arbutus Ridge well or the TW01 fails prematurely because of this pressure, there will be two questions in my mind. First of all, how will the wells of Bowen Bay cope with serving the whole west side? And I'm not sure what they think about this, but I'm pretty sure I can guess. And who's going to pay for finding new wells in King Edward Bay that have failed prematurely because of that pressure? There is actually no provision or planning for long-term damage done for this kind of thing, frustrating though that is. It's just been omitted somehow. People will be asking King Edward Bay to dip in their pockets to find more money to solve that problem when it wasn't our problem, our doing. This is why the bylaws circumscribe costs and define the beneficiaries of producing water in local service areas. And this is the problem of playing fast and loose with the bylaws when they're inconvenient, as I think we have done. So this tells us a couple of things, really. It tells us that we have been insufficiently sensitive to the natural resources on the west side. And there are risks in the strategy of interconnectedness. That has always been the strategy. We've always been pushing for that, as if it's been the solution when in fact it's only been the problem. Sorry, I said it's been the problem. It's a bit harsh. That's not true. When it's actually should be the consequence of resolving these problems. Perhaps a much more resilient strategy might stand up to natural disaster is to ensure that each local service area has the capacity to operate independently, but may support one another in times of trouble. At the moment, we've got connections from King Edward Bay to Bluewater, from King Edward Bay to Bowen Bay, but we don't have any connections that would support King Edward Bay from either side, should we need that. Although I note that in the proposal, there's a suggestion that there is a link from Bowen Bay to King Edward Bay. Linking the whole system together such that it relies on a single well in Bowen Bay and reliant on high maintenance of high-tech equipment and with no redundancy built in or real fallback position established just isn't the way to do that for me. I just don't see that makes sense. However, the proposal before us, as far as King Edward Bay is concerned, includes the provision of water from Bowen Bay in support of protecting our wells from running dry and pumps from burning out. Now, this means it's in our interest to support the proposal, but it isn't enough. I mean, it's not nearly what is required. The 3.1 million to replace the pipes after all that money effort yields 0 additional cubic meters of water. It may, hopefully, be otherwise. We may improve the wells, and the renovation of the wells might provide something, but it's not going to be a substantial amount of money. I'd be surprised if it does. So dealing with the challenges of water distribution and renewing pipes is very important to the integrity of Bluewater Park and also King Edward Bay systems, and consistent with the principles of preservation. The single most addition is that more water. The most important addition that we can make is more water. And every effort, I think, should be expended to exhaust those possibilities to find it. And even if that means exploring for water in what is now King Edward Bay local service area, where there are several possibilities that I don't think have been considered at all. There's an interesting little patch of land between Spyglass and just at the top of Spyglass in the corner there as you turn off Windjammer, which is now a car park for the King Edward Bay Beach. That's in a very nice position, very interesting position, and there's quite a lot of land there. It'd be surprising if there wasn't water somewhere in that area. And now I'm just speculating. I'm not a water guru of any kind, but I'm just suggesting there's an interesting area that is in an interesting position that may well hold wells that are suitable for Bluewater's adding to its capacity. And there are a couple of others, 3 others that I can think of off the top of my head. What I do know is that if if we were to find water on the edge of King Edward Bay, local service area that was dedicated to the service of Bluewater Park, there would be widespread support in the local community in support of that annexing, if you like, for that purpose. So in kind of conclusion, I'm going to go over some of the things that I've already said in the written document that we have, but King Edward Bay is primarily concerned to preserve the integrity and longevity of the natural resource and infrastructure, to avoid adding risk to the water or water security. We've always maintained that the three problems in Bluewater of supply, of storage, of distribution of water should be resolved in Bluewater. And meeting the demand for water from Bluewater, it continues to be a threat to the water security in King Edward Bay, and also now to the water security in Bowen Bay. While the inclusion of Bowen Bay in supporting demand from Bluewater Park is helpful to King Edward Bay, it actually does not fully remedy the risk. Until the whole infrastructure of Bluewater is restored and new water is found to take the burden of this demand, linking the three systems merely spreads the risk as wide as it can go. King Edward Bay supports the planned infrastructure project only because it's a good start. But we're anxious. We're anxious that once water from both King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay is made freely available in Bluewater, the effort to complete the project of pipe replacement and reducing risks accordingly, storing water and finding new water may just stop. So there's some of our anxieties and some of what we see in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And Chair Dufty.
Wow, those are big shoes to fill. First off, I do want to thank Mayor and Council for extending out to have this kind of a session with us. It's vitally important and something that has been missing from the equation for a very long time. During the 2019 water crisis, there was a follow-up meeting in August of that year at a place in the Cove area, and Mayor and a couple of councillors did attend in that and voiced their concern for what was happening in Bluewater and pledged their support to get to an ultimate solution of where we wanted to go with this, and that was going to meet the needs of the West Side communities that is somewhat interconnected with the water supplies that we have out here right now. And that was a big thing to see that kind of involvement. But this is just another step above that we really appreciated. And also wanted to reach out to the municipal staff, Patrick, Kristen, Steph for putting up with us through many meetings too, and Liam for his guidance and support through this as well to get us to where we are here today. It's without that we wouldn't be here. So we'd still be back and forth and complaining about each other, and that which is not healthy for anybody. And also to John and Brian, the level of respect that I have for each of you through this, and your commitment to the communities over here, and just having that level of trying to listen to all of what we've got to say, but also doing it in a respectful manner to talk back with us and try and come up with solutions that would suit us all in the end has been great to work with. And of course, the community, they've been involved from all the way Bowen Bay residents, King Edward Bay, Bluewater Park. Everybody's been participating in this, sending in letters of concern, suggestions. All of those should stay on the table as potentials for a pragmatic approach that we're going to be looking at here in the immediate and the long-term future. Like this doesn't stop with a 1.7 million phase one or a 3.1 million next. It's what do we need to do pragmatically in coming up with solutions for the long term, not for the next 10, 15 years. I look back of the challenges that we've had in Bluewater for the last couple of decades. We've lived through two major water crises. We've lived through just about every summer of water restrictions that was hitting stage 4. That affects the community. It affects it a lot. And we've looked for the municipality to come up with solutions that unfortunately just has come up short for us over the years. And we want to finally get to a point where the solutions are being implemented, and we can now rely on a safe, reliable, potable water supply for us, and keeping things on the table that is thinking out of the box. It's looking at conservation. It's looking at what we can do differently, whether it's gray water, non-potable water for future things 2050 down the road. Keeping everything on the table, drilling new wells to supplement what we have over here on the west side, I think is definitely something that we all need to continue to embrace and look at a very comprehensive and multi-pronged approach to coming up to solve the solutions for us here on the west side. We acknowledge in Bluewater that the assets do need to be replaced. Bowen Island Municipality's assets are nearing end of life in certain sections, and in years to come, Bowen Bay and whatever form is going to be facing the same thing, because we have water systems that are pretty much of close vintage, if not slightly newer, over in Bowen Bay. But there again, John touched on it, that needs to be investigated further. So it's not just about what's going to be facing Bluewater in the coming year, 5 years, 10 years, but all of us. And so there again, we've got to support an integrated approach and how the cost sharing is going to be, and how it falls into the current LSA structure that's binding us right now, and or creating the footprints of how we move forward on this. I guess from what we do from the municipality, what they think is the best balanced water needs of the west side as the whole, with the available supply. We look to the municipality to come up with the answers that's going to ensure that, like Brian has indicated, that we're protecting this precious resource for all of us. And it's not just here on the west side. How the aquifers under the island are going to affect others in other parts of the island too. It's beyond just what's on the west side. We got to think larger aspects of it as well. Like I said before, we need to continue to source other ways to think out of the box, to come up with additional sources in whatever form. Just to throw it into it as an aside here, we own some property over on the Big Island, Hawaii. It's an off-grid property, and we rely completely on rainwater harvesting. You don't drill water wells on the Big Island. It's just, you can't get water out of the ground there. It's just the way it is. And I think things like that need to have that pragmatic approach on where we go with this in the future, and for even little things like watering the gardens and such. Those all things have to play a bigger role in what we're trying to solve here. Where do we think this is going to go with Bluewater Park property owners? I truly feel that the phase 1 is going to be an achievable thing for us right now. Bluewater residents, homeowners realize we've got infrastructure that's old. We've been asking for replacements on those and upgrades to larger tanks over the last 2 decades, and nothing has happened. We know that it's time to do that, and we are pushing forward to get everybody on board to support that thing, to support everything that needed for that. The next phases, I think we're still a little short on what we need to do to convince the community. I think as Brian also and John alluded, there could be different slight avenues of forks in the road. That's what Brian said, that would have to be investigated a bit more just to see where this is going to land for us too. Because if we pigeonhole ourselves into one specific right now, as we get into the next phases, I think there's a danger that you are going to lose the community support on that. But on the same token, if we continue going back every 2 or 3 years and asking for more money over and over again, you're going to lose the community when it comes to that as well. So that it's going to be a fine line that we have to walk here in order to do that. And then all the financial aspect of this that's going to hit Bluewater Park homeowners in a big way here. We need to look at those different avenues. And I think there'll be some members of the public that'll be bringing those up later on for discussion. So Kristen, you're going to be on the spotlight for having some of those discussions. But yeah, we need to look at that too, and how that this can be affordable to people in the communities. Because we're all going to be facing a fair amount of increase, and we've seen our property taxes throughout Bowen go up. Other costs of living go up. That's all playing into this. That has to be a factor here. Interest rates are still a big concern, and the reason why that they're up there is they don't want everybody borrowing like crazy right now. And here we are. We're looking at borrowing a big lump sum of money, which is counter to what Bank of Canada is telling us to do, or the government's telling us to do. So those have to all be factored into all this. But the other thing too is that Bowen Island municipality themselves needs to come to the table on this too. We've got road base that is attributed to the last two water failures, water line failures in the Bluewater area. The road base is insufficient. That needs to be part of this big program. The pavement structure, it's being held together with chip seal. It's an inch thick. That's not an appropriate thing to be looking at for protecting the new water infrastructure that is buried in the ground afterwards, and culvert upgrades at the same time. So it's just not about what Bluewater Park users are going to have to come up for financing to support the municipal water systems and other infrastructure, but it's where's the rest of this money going to come from to support all this? That's the other puzzle piece that we've got to fit into all this. Yeah, and it's getting to the point where I coined a bit of a phrase here that it's time to start stop kicking this watering can down the road. It's gone on long enough. It may spring a leak every once in a while, but we patch it up. And there are mechanisms in place for the time being to find those leaks. As I alluded in the fact sheet that we sent out to everybody, I think it does a pretty good job just to seeing what the history has been in Bluewater. And if you haven't read it yet, I encourage you to read through it just to get a better understanding of what we've gone through, what we've been able to dig up for information, that kind of thing, all through reading through 2 decades worth of minutes off the municipal website, and other miscellaneous pieces of information, even the museum archives, that kind of thing helped a little bit as well too. So it's just all leveraging on that just to help everybody understand more of what we have been going through here, and what we want to do to support the municipality to do the upgrades on their water systems on the west side here in the future. And that's so important to us to get to those next levels, because we're tired of just sitting here and waiting and just kicking this around. We need to move forward on it. Where do I see this in 2050, 30 years from now? It's probably going to be a bit different of a vision than Brian and John, but I believe, and I know others on the LAC also believe, that eventually, and this is going to align more with the municipality of a common water board as such, utility board, how that plays out in the details in that, but all these different LACs to support the LSAs probably is going to have to change in the future. I think John, you referenced it that they're dysfunctional, or I think it was actually Trevor, but that needs to be done in a different way as well. And the time and the effort that goes into these LAC meetings and everything. Leanne brought some really good things to the table about how LSAs can be managed from more of a board level of such, or a utility board, to make these work. And these are the things that we can work together on in the future to come up. It's not going to happen now. There's a lot of things of the future vision is going to take 20 or 30 years to do, but we got to start somewhere. We got to start talking as a team to get to those end results. So that's where I see this going. And I don't really have much more to say here. So thanks.
Thank you, Chair Dufty, and thank you to all the chairs. I mean, been really helpful to hear all three of you speak, and I can feel the histories and the technicalities and the relationships present, and some of the complexity that arises in all of that as we get together at this table. What I'd maybe suggest that we do is open it up to questions directly on the presentation for a round from council, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A from the public, and then we'll come back and see if there is a resolution to be had at the end of this. So to councillors on the call here, any questions for our chairs? Councillor Fast.
Thank you. Thank you, chairs. That was very eloquent and a good summation for somebody who's been following the ideas of water conservation for many years, including in the official community plan that I was just consulting here. And I wonder, it's funny because I just came from an Islands Trust Council Zoom meeting, which is about preserve and protect, as you know. And that's some of the words that I heard in your presentations. And I wondered, and maybe this isn't the time to ask this question, but I didn't hear, I heard staff talk about meeting demand and demand rising. I didn't hear anybody talking about managing demand, or I know there's been some conservation pricing that's been happening, but I think it's you know, it's the easy go-to thing, which is to meet peak demand. And I'm wondering, out of the themes I heard and the principles, I heard some that might be compatible with managing, containing, maintaining, reducing demand in a climate, in a changing climate world where we still are kind of waiting for the fall rains. I'm wondering if maybe I'll start with staff. Is there a reason that we're engineering in order to meet high demand, peak demand?
And I will field that over to our CAO.
Yeah, thank you, Mira. Thank you, Councillor Fast. It's a good question. And you know, with any water system, you have to think about it from a supply side and a demand side. And so with this particular system, we definitely think about the demand side. Demand side is the conservation approach. The supply side is build more supply, build a bigger dam, drill more wells, that kind of a thing. And the demand side is where you try to minimize use, reduce consumption. The cheapest water is always already in your pipe. So that's a phrase I used to use at the province all the time. However, Bowen Islanders are really good at conservation. And so there isn't actually a lot of room of increasing supply capacity through demand management. There's definitely room. There's definitely room for us to go there, but we're already lower than most municipalities, way lower than the provincial.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers my question right there. You don't need to go further because that's just the same problem we ran into with the composting facility. We weren't eligible for grants because we were already doing so magnificently at recycling. And okay, thank you. And I just wanted to make sure it wasn't being missed, and obviously it's not. And I have, and I'll pass on to others, or any other remarks.
To the King Edward Bay Chair.
Well, thanks. I just wanted to make a quick reply there. That what's interesting about what Liam has said, and this question is that you're quite right about the demand side. On the west side, actually, are looking at our figures, they're really quite reasonable. We're not excessive consumers. There are one or two houses that are, you know, a bit tend to be excessive, but generally speaking, we're very reasonable as consumers. But what that tells us is that there's no slack. We're already, in terms of the quantity available and the demand that we're being made on it, there's actually no spare. And that's the thing that worries me. And that's why we've become preoccupied. I've become preoccupied with the issue of ensuring that we deal with the supply issue, that we exhaust every possibility, because we've got no place to go on the demand side.
I'll just add a couple of things. I was looking in the official community plan, and there's support in here for using gray water for rainwater for potable use will be encouraged, for example. That's policy 57. There's other things like that. I gather Vancouver Coastal Health has a lot to say about that. But I have been lucky in the past 4 years to be chairing meetings on Hornby and Denman and places where people are being creative with water catchment, including some new projects. However, that doesn't help us here, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay. Recognize Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier in the presentation, I believe it was Mr. O'Donnell presented an alternate option. If we could, without going into like 10 minutes of description of it, could you give us 30 seconds or a minute of what exactly that was again? Because I don't think I caught it all.
Hi, it's John. Actually, I did text it to our clerk, but essentially, what it involves is, I'll go through it again. It involves the first two things that are in the 1.7 million. Two of the things that are in the $1.7 million option, which is upgrading of Bluewater wells at a cost of $75,000, and then what they call the phase one replacement of the Bluewater pipes, water mains that are considered most at risk at a cost of $980,000. And then the third thing would be to replace the second set of pipes that are maybe at or near the end of service life and are also considered undersized for firefighting purposes. And that's for $1.38 million. And so those total $2.435 million, which, as I said, split the difference between the 1.7 and the 3.1.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Getty.
Sorry. So there hasn't been any budgeting in this for exploring new wells. The use of the old above ground, what do you call that? The pool that's up on the end of Bluewater for fire protection.
Open reservoir.
Thank you, the reservoir. That's a nice word. And sidetracking, changing potable water that's been used in gardens. So those options, in terms of reducing the demand side, they are going to have a cost to them. And is there any costing out of what that might mean and whether or not there's any savings in that in terms of these high tech engineered results? And there was some mention in one of the reports that there might be grants available for was it stage 4 increased reservoir? I'm sure that every community in the whole of the province is applying for those, but is that the case that there might be grants for part of this?
I will hand that over to our CAO, both the comment about, or the question about demand management as well as available grants.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we're always looking for grant funding whenever possible. So we will put forward an application if there's a program where this is a fit. And we will look at for the best possible application too. I can say that these types of projects don't fare as well as a project that is looking to address drinking water quality. So addressing quantity supply issues are generally not as successful as a water quality issues, but it's definitely something that we will always keep an eye on. And again, from the demand side, we're always trying to promote and support demand management, and continuing to use the open reservoir is something that we can consider from an emergency use perspective, and we do have to take into consideration of the main maintenance of that reservoir. And I'm not sure if that's designated as a dam as per the dam regulations that the province requires, and as such, like, what are the dam safety requirements there? So we have to look into that further. But speaking to just Chair Thomas Peters' point about the supply side, we're not going to give up on looking for new supply. So we definitely want to do that, and there's some valid concerns about being too reliant on like just a couple of sources, and so we will continue to explore new supply opportunities. I think that's a key element that we've got to keep in front and center.
Thank you. Very appreciated.
Gray water and the use of gray water and the use of rainwater are great options to reduce demand, and we will do what we can to encourage that. It's hard to pass regulation that requires existing construction to use that. It's easier on net new construction than net new developments and subdivisions, and we do see that in some of the comprehensive development zones on Bowen, where it is a requirement to install a large cistern and no potable water from the community system can be used for outdoor uses, and those are things that we can impose on new development, new builds. Harder to do on existing builds, but definitely something that we can encourage and we can promote. And getting into the use of gray water in potable scenarios is pretty tricky, and it's dubbed as purple pipes because you have to plumb all your pipes purple that you're using non-potable water for, so that you don't accidentally connect a pipe to a kitchen faucet or something. And so it's entirely feasible. I know a couple of people in Bowen that have done it. But it is very expensive and again, easier from a new build than from a retrofit perspective. So what we're looking at here is not, these aren't like extravagant supply side solutions. We're not looking to do a really significant net new water source solution. We're looking to maximize the existing supply that we currently have access to, and to maximize that supply to benefit the most people, and keeping in mind the preservation of the asset, because that is critical. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Any other councillors, or are we okay moving to the Q&A, knowing that we'll have council will have lots of opportunity at the end of the Q&A to ask more questions? Councillor Wake, you are on mute, which is the motto of the 2020s.
So it seems to me that we're dancing around the solutions that would actually work here, and we're trying to choose. Understandably, we're trying to choose between them, which ones to employ, and it's my thinking here, and yeah, in spite of the fact that each of the water districts have expressed understanding of what the others are going through. I think that we need to take this to the next level and have each one of the three come up with an idea of what they can do, what they would do if this problem was actually all theirs, so that everybody is contributing to the solution. And I mean that both on the supply side and the demand side. A 600 square foot floor plate on a house with a roof overhanging eaves can generate in the rainy season thousands of gallons of water. And part of the problem here is that we want to water gardens in the summer when it's not raining very much, so we need to have a lot of storage. But I'm not hearing, we're talking about, yeah, that would work, but we're not talking about how we'd actually do it. And I understand the CAO suggesting that we can't necessarily force, maybe we can suggest, but I think we need to actually consider and help each other by saying, look, we're not right up against it now. We've got some solutions that we think will work, short term. We've got some concerns about the money in the long term, but I think we should be going after all these solutions. And maybe that means we actually say no more, until we have a little more resilience in the system. There is no more potable water for gardens. And I don't think we can do it through the building code because we're not building enough new places. But I just think we really have to look at that. I think we definitely have to look at drilling some more wells. But I also think we need to consider that this water is truly everybody's, and so we've got more in some places than others. It does appear that we can get by in the short run by, like, it's a fairly easy fix to connect all three systems together. But we can't do that. I'm really hearing Brian here, saying we don't want to do that, and then find out that nobody wants to do anything more. So this is where I think we need each area to step up and say, okay, here's what we're going to do to contribute to the supply side of things, and here's what we're going to do to I don't think we can reduce demand, but when I say supply, it's both groundwater supply and what's falling out of the sky, which is everybody's water.
And just on that, is there a specific question that you'd like answered, and maybe I'll throw it over to Chair O'Donnell for a response.
So I guess the question would be to each of the chairs, what can you do that's more than you want to do because you're worried that somebody else isn't going to do enough, or let's put our heads together here and really try to solve this for everybody, not just for ourselves.
Chair O'Donnell.
Thank you. One thing that hasn't been mentioned tonight is firefighting. A lot of these upgrades are actually driven by the need to have a strong infrastructure to meet UFC rating firefighting, having enough flow, etc. And we believe King Edward Bay is the only LAC local service area that actually, for the majority of the area, meets the firefighting standards. So we have to be mindful of the fact that a lot of this discussion is about upgrading infrastructure. And a lot of the reason that we are actually got into the debate about upgrading infrastructure was that our systems, when they were installed, did not meet firefighting requirements. So we do need to be mindful of that. And speaking to, climate change, etc., we're all probably quite worried during the heat dome and during September, October of this year of a forest fire. And certainly, getting that new tank eventually for Bluewater, getting a bigger tank, perhaps even for Bowen Bay, and keeping the bigger tank for King Edward Bay gives us a lot of resiliency in terms of having water supply during, we hope it'll never happen, but we certainly have emergency planning for it in place for a fire, a wildfire. And so, yes, we obviously are very concerned about the demand side, and but what we've been trying to do, because the demand side is most of the debate tonight has been about managing the demand side, but we know managing the demand side isn't going to be an immediate solution to the problems we're facing right now. So I had suggested a couple of times over various is deal with the infrastructure issues, deal with getting our systems in order, and then sit down and really think hard about the demand side and think about how we can develop a system that doesn't penalize full-time residents over part-time residents. Develop a system that still allows some people to have gardens, which are part of the very much part of Bowen Island and Bowen Island culture. And of course, also given the trends in food production, we may see people actually, well, a lot of people do have vegetable gardens, do have gardens that they rely on for food supply. So I'm not saying, no one has said no to more moves on the demand side. What we have been trying to say is let's be clever about it. Let's try and think of unintended consequences. Let's be sure we don't rush off and everyone puts in private tanks, so there's almost no water flowing in our pipes. So then we're failing our chlorine tests every day. That's just an extreme thing, but still, that's all part of the equation. And I'm, not using that argument to say, no, we don't need to do things. But I think right now, what we need to focus on is how can we get our house in order in terms of the infrastructure. And then once we've got our house in order or got a program moving forward for the next 20 to 30 years, because I did mention, I said over the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to be doing these meetings every 5 years with another plebiscite to get our house in order. So I hope that answers that question on the demand. Thank you.
King Edward Bay, Chair Thomas Peter or Chair Dufty, did you want to comment on Councillor Wake's question at all?
Well, it's very difficult to see a reason for disputing what's been said. I mean, I think, I think Councillor Wake has put his finger on something that we're all kind of talking about. We're just not, we haven't got to the practicalities of what we're actually going to do. But might I also say that the curious thing about some of this is that, and we kind of forget this, that there is only the demand side and the supply side. And from my point of view, as I see this, there's not much movement on the demand side. People are not profligate with water on the west side. There's not much movement. Everything for me has got to do with the supply side. So we have to stop water leaking from our pipes. We have to find new water where it's particularly needed. And if we're going to build resilience into this system, we have to try and do this separately. So we have to make sure that the three systems can act deliver water independently of each other, but that we're connected in a very deliberate way so that we can help each other in difficult times. Be that a fire, be that flood, be that earthquake, changing weather patterns, and so on. Sudden breakdowns of wells and so on. Now, I don't think there's anybody on the west side that would disagree with that. Now, and if we did do that, and if we did establish water in new water in Bluewater and deal with the infrastructure, critical thing, that would deal with the supply side in Bluewater, and nothing else would have to be done. That's the bizarre thing about this, that's actually all that needs to be done for the whole of the west side. A feed pipe could come from Bowen Bay into the King Edward Bay to help us out and make sure that we've got some water if we were ever in trouble, and so on. But we wouldn't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on clever pipes with clever electronics and throw people into debt for years and years and years if we did that one thing in addition to dealing with the Bluewater infrastructure. So why are we not just doing that?
Thank you. And our CAO point of information or something you wanted to provide?
Well, a point of information, but I see Chair Dufty's got his hand up. So,
okay. So I recognize Chair Dufty, and then we'll go to our CAO, and then we'll move into the public Q&A.
John and Brian do bring some very, very legitimate points and perspectives on this. And it's not that residents in Bluewater Park is opposed to any of this. We're looking for a comprehensive set of step solutions for us finally getting to a solution that we've been waiting for 20 some years. And just to touch on even what I mentioned earlier about thinking out of the box, there's a 7 million liter open water reservoir up by the Bluewater water tank that is what I was getting at as a pragmatic approach to non-potable firefighting supply all the way down Windjammer to Bowen Bay in the future. All sorts of different angles that we can look at this that should all stay on the table for us to create a multifaceted system of water supply of non-potable and potable itself too. And like Brian has indicated, searching for some supplemental additional water, and it may come. There are properties on the west side that are still potentially slated for development. But then again, we don't know if they will or not. So we can't bank on that as well. To investigate some other areas within the existing LSAs that could provide some supplemental water is, I think, a good thing to leave on the table to look at that too. But also the bigger thing too is that even if the phases 1 through 3 plus, we call it 4 with the Bluewater tank, that's, by the time everything gets well and done, that's probably about an $8 million tab right there. But that's probably another $4 to $5 million worth of municipal monies that have to go in for upgrading of the roads, everything like that too. So this is, like I was getting before, this is a big ticket item that needs to be, and then factor in when Bowen Bay starts down that road as well too. Where's the financing going to come from? Are we getting close to that ceiling from a municipal point of view, that kind of thing? So it's all of these that we have to look at together to figure out at what levels. We in Bluewater realize we got to replace our water mains that are at high risk, and we got to get on there and start doing that. As long as it's for sure a very the engineering reports and that have made that very clear to the community that is the right steps that we need to take. If we need to work and go for that 3.1 million or a variation of it, which is going to include some additional drilling of wells to help with the cause as well, by all means, let's like leave everything on the table here to come up with the best solutions for all of us.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll recognize Mr. Edwards, as it sounds like we're starting to get into the technicals and what something actually looks like. So we'll go to Mr. Edwards, close this portion, and then I know that there's probably members of the public that are anxious to have their questions answered.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I did want to just make a couple of points of information. One is that right now we currently operate each water system somewhat independently, albeit Bluewater Park is entirely dependent, not entirely, but it is definitely dependent on the King Edward Bay system. However, like operating all three systems, if we were to operate them as a truly integrated system, still constitutes a very small municipal system. The systems as they currently exist are very small. Combined, they're still small. So as far as municipal systems go, it's not a very complicated, complex system. And the points about resiliency are very well taken, regardless of whether they maintain to be independent or to be like interconnected and work as one. Resiliency is still critical and key. And that would be something that we'd be looking for as it is as one system, or whether it's still independent. And I do also want to say that the idea of bringing the systems together in a technical way through interconnections yields a lot of efficiencies, a lot of benefits, but we will most certainly look to be keeping the LSAs, the actual local service areas, defined for a very long period of time, just to be able to isolate capital costs where those capital costs should be borne. And that's a practice that's used throughout municipalities in BC. It's very common. So you have one water system, but you have distinct LSAs just for capital cost recovery, but the system's managed as one. That's a very, very common practice. So, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. So let's move on to our public Q&A section of the meeting. And there's a couple of ways that as the public, you can submit comments. If you feel comfortable and you'd like to ask a question out in the open air, you can raise your hand and be recognized by the chair, which is myself. Alternatively, you also have the option of sending a message in the chat to Sophie Idsinga, our corporate officer. If you are uncomfortable on Zoom or would like to ask a question, more quietly or more anonymously, you're free to do that as well. And I'll bounce back between live questions and questions that she has taken. So any questions from the public on what you've heard so far, or how the process has been progressing, or things that you'd like to know from either the chairs or council? We have Mr. Vetter up here first.
Can you hear me? Yeah, my question
I can hear
would be for, okay, great. My question would be, I guess, for Liam, as Patrick's not there. We've heard repeatedly in the presentations this evening that, and in fact, Liam himself had mentioned the need to continue looking for water sources. And, the EXP report, the groundwater survey study said there's a potential for a lot of additional groundwater that's unallocated. To quote them, it's an abundance of stored unallocated water in the aquifer. It's a matter of where those wells are drilled. They shouldn't be close to the Mutiny Lane well field. And new wells, according to their study, are on the order of about $360,000 all in, with planning and engineering and power supply, et cetera, et cetera. Yet we're talking about spending $715,000 just to connect to Bowen Bay's well, and you're putting a lot of pressure and a lot of faith in one well to really make up for the deficit in the system, in particular Bluewater, of course. So my question is, why isn't there any money in the budget to look for new wells?
Mr. Edwards?
Again, the notion here is that we want, like, we understand that the existing supply capacity of the three systems combined can satisfy the demand. And so rather than hedging bets on new wells and to try to satisfy the demand required for Bluewater Park, let's improve the system so that it's better interconnected and better support each system, and actually resolve the demand question with the existing supply. But whether it's in parallel or it's in the near future, we then continue to look for new supply. So
where is that money coming from to look for wells now rather than down the road?
It's not in the current proposal right there. So it's right now we're the money for new wells is not in the proposal that's before us tonight.
And why not?
Because that's an additional 360 odd thousand or what have you, that at this immediate time we believe isn't necessary. So
yeah, it just seems like we're kicking that can down the road, and we might regret it. Again, it's putting a lot of faith in one well in Bowen Bay. And as maybe you can point me to a different piece of data that gives you the confidence in Bowen Bay well number 1. But when I read the study from Urban Systems, they basically did a 2-day test in July of 2020, and the maximum duration of any one pumping session on that well was 7 hours. Yet we're just finishing a 100-day drought this fall. How would Bowen Bay well 1 have handled that? I would contend we don't really know. So it seems imperative to me, and everybody has suggested this in this meeting tonight, including all 3 chairs of the LSAs, that we need to find new wells.
I'm not arguing that.
I just think this should be part of the current phase 1 of this whole process.
I'm not arguing that there isn't a need to look for additional supply. However, everything that we have, the information that we have suggests that the existing supply can satisfy the existing demand.
Maybe
I don't have a great deal of confidence in that.
So, and just to wrap up this question, because it sounds like part of the ask perhaps is, what is the timeline then for new wells if there's going to be a significant cost incurred?
And who's going to pay for it?
That hasn't been mapped out.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vedder. I'm going to move to our corporate officer. Is there a question from the chat?
Yes, thank you. There is actually a comment that was made much earlier, and that was just that current zoning for secondary suites could dramatically increase demand. So again, that was just a comment. And then I've got a question in here that says, if the municipality decided to go ahead with the plan, either phase 1 or phase 2 or all, without the support of a referendum, I've heard they can get the funds through a parcel tax. Would this tax be payable in full as opposed to over 30 years per household?
Perhaps I will direct that to the CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. A parcel tax would be the maximum amount of money that we could collect all in 1 year. So that would be a question between what is most necessary. It would be a decision between what is most necessary and what council deemed would be the maximum that prospective homeowner could be expected to pay. So yeah, parcel taxes are not amortized over any longer period than 1 year, because what that essentially means is that the municipality is internally funding that debt. And given the demands on our reserve funds at the moment, there is no internal capacity at this time to fund any internal debt. So
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Richard Underdown, I see a hand up. You are muted, unfortunately.
Just unmuting myself.
Oh,
there.
great.
Thank you. I would like to pick up on Dennis Vedder's comments, because in reading the reports, that was something that jumped out at me as well. And I guess I'll direct the question to Liam, just to follow up on what you were saying about the exploration for more water. The recommendation in the EXP report 3 years ago, December the 5th, 2019, said that monitoring of water levels in the shallow test well confirms the groundwater levels within the superficial sediments overlying the bedrock aquifer were stable throughout the 2-month monitoring period. This generally indicates the shallow aquifer was not measurably influenced by groundwater withdrawals from the deeper bedrock aquifer. This interpretation provides support for additional consideration of the shallow test well as a potential supplementary source of groundwater for the Bluewater Park well field. That seems like a very straightforward description of a ready source of water. I would like to know why that recommendation, to my knowledge anyway, was not followed. 3 years ago.
Mr. Edwards?
Yep.
Mr. Edwards?
I don't have a very clear answer for you. I don't know so whether that was a specific recommendation from the report to say that this should be pursued, or whether that was more a statement of information that they inferred from
No,
their.
I just read it to you. It is a specific recommendation
So
from
what is the actual recommendation?
that, well, what I just read provides support, additional consideration, shallow test well as a potential supplementary source of groundwater for the Bluewater Park well field. So the recommendation is to continue monitoring water levels in that shallow test well. I understand that that was deferred. Staff did not go ahead with that recommendation. The second recommendation was then to drill a new bedrock well approximately 700 to 1,000 feet from the existing Bluewater Park wells. So we've paid expert hydrologists to go in and study the problem with the Bluewater Park well field. They've come back with recommendations 3 years ago. They seem to me as a layman pretty straightforward and clear. Again, why have these not been followed up on? We're talking about, supply and yes, Bowen Bay looks like it has a well that could service, instead of the 60 homes it was designed to service, an additional 150. It seems to me like a very frail system reliant on one source of water. And as others have pointed out, whether it be the 1.7 or the $3.1 million alternatives, neither of those allow for additional funding to find more water. More water will be required, whether it's now or in the future. And we've got a report recommending, making suggestions, and indicating that certainly with the superficial aquifer, that there's a stable supply of water in Bluewater Park, not 3 kilometers away. that needs to be then pumped through a very expensive network of pipes. I'll shut up there.
Thank you, Mr. Underden. Noting that the Director of Engineering seems to have dropped off the call, was there specific comments that you wanted to make to that, Mr. Edwards?
No, I can't answer that question.
What is the best way for Mr. Underdown to get an answer to that question?
Upon our engineer's return, well, I can ask to respond to it and
okay,
go from there.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, would Chair Dufty have any information on that, being closer to it than any of us?
Unmuting. I know that those discussions for the shallow water well that was drilled in May of 2019 as a emergency measure, along with the 640-foot deep well that came up pretty much dry. As a follow-up to that, the discussions with engineering, municipal engineering, was what would be the ramifications of pursuing that shallow well, and the level of Vancouver Coastal Health Authority requirements would potentially make it very cost prohibitive to pursue that. And that's what we were told at the time, because being such a shallow well, it would need additional treatment other than chlorination, the typical treatments that we would see. So it would be almost of a level of packaged treatment plant on a smaller scale that is pretty much has been built over for Cove Bay water system. That's kind of the description of utilizing that particular shallow well at the time. And that I remember that from the discussions. But then again, Mr. Graham will have to confirm that when he gets back.
Yes,
I do believe there are other shallow wells on Bowen that are being used currently as a source of water. But yeah,
I don't think any shallow well would require, sorry, Mr. Chair, shallow wells are deemed, they changed the term. They used to call them GUDIs, groundwater under direct influence of surface water. And so they do require filtration. And so if it is a community system, they would require filtration.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Underden. Trevor Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a follow-up to the last two comments from Dennis and Richard. This is a question that the residents of Bluewater have been asking for the last 2 years. What's happened with the shallow well? Why aren't we looking at the reservoir that existed for 20 odd years and has been let go into disrepair? Why aren't we utilizing that resource? We have two main water streams that come down from the recharge area. One is at the head of Mutiny Lane where the wells are. The other one is the big recharge piece, the creek that runs down through Spyglass. The amount of water that comes down through them in fall, winter, spring is massive. Tons of water. And yet we still are not considering these water sources, in addition to what Brian may have offered up in King Edward Bay. There's been no discussion, refusal, I should submit, to discuss these as potential water sources going forward. I know as a resident of Bluewater, I would prefer that we were free of the tentacles of Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way at all. I mean that in a positive way. I'd like to have our own water supply. And there are options there. And some of them not so expensive. Some may be too expensive. I'm not sure. But we haven't pursued those options. We've doggedly pursued a single option for a West Side system where Bluewater gets its water from Bowen Bay. And I think, back to Tim's point, which is a very, very good one, Tim. We need to look at all the angles on supply, and we need to look at all angles on managing demand. There's a number of us in Bluewater today that capture our rainwater, we store it over the winter, and we use it to water our gardens. There's a number of us that do that today. But I can tell you now that in Bluewater and in King Edward Bay, the demand for water during the summer rises by about 20 to 30%. Even though we're not massive users of water, it's still rising. And yet we're not exploiting the local supply that we have. And some of it is massive. A lot of water comes off gardening. So, sort of stepping back a bit and sort of getting back to what is it we should be looking at for Bluewater and what is it we should be looking at to borrow money for. I think we need to revisit. Just take a small break and rethink through what it is we're trying to achieve here and use the money that we will borrow because we need to borrow money, but use it in the right way. Use it for the right things and not put extra weight on our friends and neighbors in Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay to prop up Bluewater for the next 30, 50, 100 years. That's inappropriate and doesn't need to happen. I know that's not a question, Andrew, but I thought it had to be said.
I was going to ask if you had one to sharpen because you covered a lot of ground and eloquently, Trevor. Are you okay if I move on?
Yes, I am. Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Ms. Insinga. Well, I can never pronounce it. Insinga.
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 I just have a question from the chat. If we have an existing reservoir with so much accessible surface water, is there no way to make that potable? For example, a treatment facility?
Mr. Edwards?
It's a timely question because I wanted to speak to that. Yes, you could. However, it's very expensive to install a filtration system to satisfy the demand. Expensive from a capital cost point of view up front and expensive from a maintenance cost. So deep confined aquifers is your probably cheapest and best source if you can have adequate supply. So that's what's being pursued. Using that open reservoir for emergency firefighting, it sounds attractive, but as soon as you flood your distribution system with contaminated water that is no longer meeting the drinking water quality guidelines, it means you are immediately placed on a boil water or do not consume order. And so while it is a viable option to consider, it comes with significant management risks and requirements. So, we really will look at the viability of maintaining and hanging on to that open reservoir if that's the route we go. But we have to recognize that if you then use that water for an emergency, you've then put the entire system at risk if it's not treated. And it's the same for the irrigation too. So having separate systems where you've got a non-potable system and a potable system is incredibly expensive. It's really only practiced in the Okanagan in BC and heavy in agricultural regions. And so it's not really, a separated system isn't really feasible for us here. But I believe that's why the direction that's been chosen is to stick with the confined aquifers because it's the most cost-effective supply options for us rather than pursuing surface water or shallow wells.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Before going back to Mr. Vetter or Mr. Hodge, just for the sake of equity, If there is there anyone else who would like to ask a question in this first round?
Looks
I
like
will
Jim
go to,
Taylor wants to-
pardon me?
It looks like Jim Taylor is waving his hand down there. You're
Oh,
muted, Jim.
I can't see him on my screen, so I will go over to Mr. Taylor first, if he is there.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes. I think the most important thing to remember here is what we need, the community needs. We forget about it. All we need is potable water. That's a priority. Firefighting is very secondary. Firefighting, when it comes to forest fires, I don't care how many water tanks we have. I don't need to be a firefighter to figure it out. They're not going to stop the forest fire. Okay. Right now, all we save for firefighting is the properties around the burning house. So it's potable water. That's the only thing we need. Therefore, I don't think there's a need to have an 8-inch line. I think a 4-inch line suffices quite well to get all the water to all the people. I just think sometimes people forget how much it costs to do things. It's sometimes not very efficient that way. I'm not trying to blame the community. They're trying to do the best they can. You know, Patrick, you're a good man. I understand that. But when I look at the hookup from Bowen Bay wells to get the Bluewater water into the Bluewater system, I think that was $1.6 million. Correct me if I'm wrong with the wells. We are currently hooked up. There's a pressure differential between the two properties or the LACs. But, you know, $50,000 worth of pumps and what have you would solve that. And we wouldn't be, Bluewater wouldn't be sinking in $1.6 million to pump water out of a well that we don't know it's going to pump the water. You could put that in, try it out for a couple of years, see what happens. Cheap. I don't think the people in Bluewater or in Bowen Bay would have a problem with that. It's just like, don't go keep spending money unnecessarily. You know, if that well won't supply it, well, probably that aquifer won't supply it. Then we may have to think about bringing water over the hill from the lake. But that's what we'd have to think about. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I will go over to David McMurray Smith.
Well, thank you, Mary Leonard. Appreciating the time. There's clearly a tremendous amount of discussion and information and questions involved in this whole process. And I would like to ask for clarification about the question or the observation that I believe was made about we have till December 12th comes. Is that correct? That there's a question coming up December 12th about the bylaw for borrowing for this project. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the intention, what came to council was a recommendation which came through the local advisory committees on a loan authorization borrowing bylaw. And the understanding that some councillors had after speaking to some of the local advisory committees was that there was still, it might not have been fully gelled. And then being a new council with a number of new councillors, there was councillors who also wanted more information as they dug in because it's a complex issue. And the intention was here is to come back and have both councillors and all three local advisory committees be able to provide input and feedback to us with the intention of getting to something on the 12th. And whatever arises out of this meeting is what will come back on the 12th.
Well, I think the question that I have in relation to that information is that I understood, I could be inaccurate in my understanding, that there was going to be a recommendation to accept whether or not a concession and it was seemed to be framed in the notion of there being a consensus gathered here. And I think we're a fair distance from a consensus regarding the amount of questions involved. So I'm curious about then what happens from this point to December 12th, and how is that question going to be reformulated given this information in a 5-day period? And is that outcome demanded to happen in some form? Or is there more time to re-engage with all these questions and options? I'd appreciate that affects, I don't know exactly all that it affects, but obviously it affects if there's another drought of the size of this summer as to what would happen. But what is the pressure that is imposing the questions that need to be answered in apparently a short amount of time? And is there enough time, and is that changeable or adjustable in any form? I know there's a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? It's essentially, you're effectively asking about timelines for process. And so the intention of the next portion of the agenda is for both the councillors here in this meeting, as well as the chairs of the local advisory committee, either to reformulate or put forward the original recommendation to accept the $1.7 million. Or there could be a recommendation that says, let's roll the dice and not do this and see what happens next summer. So in terms of what council's appetite is, for us, it's really being able to connect with you folks in the community and see where the chairs are at, where the local advisory committees are at, where the citizens are at. So from my seat, there is no foregone conclusion at this point. And I saw our CAO's hand go up, and I'll let staff respond to this as well, because they have been working on this far longer than I have. And I know our CFO in particular has been on this file for over a decade, perhaps. Mr. Edwards?
Thank you, Mayor. So from what I understand, the desire is to try to get the project, if not completed, as far along as possible prior to the full brunt of the summer season, next summer season. So when we look at the entire process to get to a borrowing approval and through a tendering process, we ideally need a decision on the December 12th. So that was what was driving the December 12th decision, to be able to try to get the project as advanced as possible to avoid the risk of another summer with the leaky pipes that we know about and the constraints on the supply. By delaying and that risks that we go through another summer without a proper solution. And as a municipality, we're keenly and constantly concerned about critical core services, and drinking water is about as fundamental as it gets. So we really want to come up with a solution, and the solution that was before you is what has been proposed as the best possible solution.
I would just reply with it, apparently by the nature of the information and responses in the meeting, that the term best solution is not yet applicable. And I well appreciate the amount of time and effort and studies that I've heard of so far, and I haven't got into great detail into them, but it does appear that some things need to be done as to what steps would be best. It appears that more time and more clarifications of efforts to find that solution amongst the people, or as subsequently, if it's not that way, there'll probably be, a lot of challenge head down the line with frustrations, and we're not looking for that. And so terminology wise, it's very challenging. Consensus is really challenging, and we can see that. So
yeah, and in fairness, I apologize because our engineer is on vacation this week, a very well-deserved vacation. He needs to take more time for himself, and tried to be here, but probably internet connectivity issues. So he could likely provide a greater degree of confidence about this proposed solution than I have. I can't answer some of those technical questions, and I know that he has answered those. He's had this conversation multiple times, and so I know that he's very confident in this proposal. But yeah, so apologize for not having him available here. It was very last minute notice to do this meeting.
well, there's a lot more to discuss there, but I thank you, and I understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Nsinga.
Thank you. I have one comment in the chat, and then I have about 6 questions built up. So I'll just start with the comment. That is, I'm heartened to hear that local service areas will be responsible for their own costs. And I concur with Trevor Hodge that we need to look very closely at how money is spent. Bluewater needs to fix the leaks before we print more money like our federal government likes to do. And then the first question in here is, if and when all 3 water districts are amalgamated and demanded such that Bowen Bay well can't keep up, how will water be rationed? Will Bluewater be put on stage 4 restrictions before King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay?
And just an important distinction in that question before I refer it over to staff is that at this point, there's no contemplation of amalgamating water systems. So what is being contemplated is interconnecting the actual physical infrastructure of the systems a little more. And I will let Mr. Edwards speak to that.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. So if and when all 3 water districts are amalgamated, which Mayor Leonard just specified is not on the table at this time, and demand is such that the Bowen Bay well can't keep up, how will water be rationed? Will Bluewater be put on stage 4 restrictions before King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay?
I don't know that has been, I'm not sure if that's been thought through by our engineer. And I don't know that there would be a differentiation of conservation restrictions between the systems.
Ms. Watson, did you want to respond?
I did. So with this proposal, what essentially is going on is the Bowen Bay wells and the King Edward Bay wells together are feeding the King Edward Bay, the very large reservoir in King Edward Bay. And all residents then would be drawing from those supplies. So at that point, operationally, although like legally and from a financial administrative position, we would maintain the local service areas, it would only make sense that everybody in those 3 districts would be subject to the same water conditions at a time because they're all feeding from the same tank.
Okay, thank you. I will bounce to a live question here from Vice Chair Heth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Don Heth. I'm the Vice Chair of the King Edward Bay LAC. I just wanted to speak to the question of timeline. Earlier this month, actually at the start of November, our LAC was surprised to hear that the pump on the only remaining productive well in Bluewater Park had failed, meaning that currently King Edward Bay is supplying 100% of the water needs of Bluewater Park. So far with the winter rains behind us, we're keeping up, but I just wanted to mention that with respect to the timeline, if this continues into the summer, we're going to be in a very, very bad situation. Already last summer, with both King Edward Bay wells going and with the productive Bluewater Park well, the reservoir at King Edward Bay dipped below the fire underwriter standards for fire suppression. So I just want to emphasize that at this point, I think the timeline is quite urgent. And I apologize if that's not quite a question, but there it is.
Thank you, Mr. Heth. Chair Thomas Peter.
So I just wanted to reply to Kirsten's comment there. It's a concern to me that we've made a statement, Kristen, in this forum about the operational management of this system, which has had zero discussion amongst the LACs, and that you have indicated that we're attending to share water in the way that you have, just because we put everything into the same reservoir, makes no sense to some people in this constituency, and we would want to have that worked out in precise detail before we made public statements about it. And this is one of the problems that has been causing challenges throughout this whole process. Public statements that have the appearance of being authoritative without any basis at all. There's actually no reason technically to put everyone on some homogeneous plan because you've decided to de facto merge the system. It can't work that way. You don't have the support of the LACs to do that. So I really would urge you to resist the temptation to make statements like that, which will inflame people in that completely unnecessarily. Thanks.
Thank you. Chair O'Donnell.
Thank you. Yes, I would want to respond as well to the statement by Kristen Watson. In the first stage, there will be a water, if it's approved in the boring bylaw, there would be a pipe built from Bowen Bay to the interconnection point with King Edward Bay. And it would allow Bowen Bay water to be pumped up to the King Edward Bay reservoir. But it would not be until the first stage of the Bowen Bay water improvements program that a new line is built to bring water back from that reservoir to Bowen Bay residents. So, we just have, as Brian said, we had to be careful about the approaches. And if Patrick was here, he could probably give a little more clarification on it. And then since this is a question forum, I actually have a question of council. In our position paper, we had suggested that a water infrastructure sharing agreement is needed. And in that water infrastructure sharing agreement, one of the things we talk about is if there is a water shortage, and then what is the stages of the different neighborhoods going on different stages. So my question is, will council consider this and perhaps suggest as part of the motion that while we move forward with the borrowing bylaw, we also at the same time ask staff to work with 3 LACs to further flesh out the water infrastructure sharing agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell. And I believe there is appetite to do that, particularly as the systems become more interconnected. There's going to need to be, I think, more governance forums such as this one, and understandings reached between the three local service areas about what that looks like. And what's being contemplated in the borrowing bylaw and going to assent to the voters doesn't preclude working in parallel as to what that governance structure and those agreements would look like. Ms. Watson.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair O'Donnell, for the clarification. You're right, I jumped ahead there. We are and have committed to bring back a draft proposal for the shared operating cost model that we've sort of talked about a little bit. We do believe that maintaining the integrity of the local service areas is important, because we do believe that the distribution systems and the cost to maintain and replace the legacy distribution systems need to stay with each local service area until it's not contemplated in any of our even midterm horizons that we would dissolve those local service areas. So it is about operations, and it is about joining the costs of the operations together and redistributing them back to each local service area in a proportionate manner. So we will bring a draft proposal back when we do the budgets, and I believe the timeline for that is probably early February, last week in January, early February.
Thank you. Chair Dufty.
Yeah, just to follow up with Donald Heath's comments in regard to the timeline. We're 3 years in on this with after the water crisis in the summer of 2019. And also there's been a realization that with King Edward Bay also at a vulnerability, this is the first step in the process. But as we've discussed today, there's other alternate steps that we can take along the way that can be melded into this as well too. But also protecting the integrity of all the water supply that's coming out of the ground on the west side too. So all vitally important. So it's all different steps that are happening. Some of them we have to make a hard choice and move forward with and get part of it done. Others we can craft a little bit more as we go and look at the long-term strategic of what we talked before of thinking out of the box part of it. But I think that there definitely is in even parts of the phase one that we can dedicate some dollars into something different to look at, definitely into phase two and beyond for doing this. But the big thing right now is protecting the water supply that we all have access to. And like I said before, we're 3 years into this, but we're also two decades into this, and enough is enough. We need to get moving on things.
Thank you, Chair. Question, we'll go back to the questions from our collected by our corporate officer.
Yes, so I have one question from the chat. It says, has consideration and modeling been done with respect to financing options? With the most recent interest rate increase and another on the horizon, upfront payment options to mitigate the massive interest cost to individuals over a 30-year amortization? And a related comment to that question from someone else was, would anybody's financial advisor advise them to borrow $3 million in today's financial climate?
To our CFO.
So the first question, if I just might repeat it so I know I heard it properly, strategies to front load some of the debt so you're not amortizing it over such a long period, or can you just read it again for me, please, Sophie?
Yes, so has consideration and modeling been done with respect to financing options? With the most recent interest rate increase and another on the horizon, upfront payment options to mitigate the massive interest costs to individuals over a 30-year amortization?
A couple of things we can do, given that we know interest rates are really high right now. We know potentially they, with the interest rate signal from the Bank of Canada today, it almost seems like they were potentially saying that they may have reached their peak and they may not increase anymore. When we're doing long-term debt, what we can do is borrow it temporarily for 5 years. So if we were to do a loan authorization and get authority to borrow, we could borrow right up to the maximum of the authority for a period of 5 years. It would not be locked in. It would be a variable interest rate, kind of like a line of credit, could be fixed or interest-only payments for the first 5 years, whatever kind of repayment strategy we wanted in the first 5 years. And then with the hopes that interest rates would begin to come down over the next 5 years, we could then pick what was the most optimal point in the interest rate cycle to then lock it in for 30 years after that. And we could make definitive payments, maybe make a little more payments up front to try and reduce that cost. But once that debt is locked in for the term, it's actually only locked in for 10 years, because although we call it 30-year debt, it's like your mortgage. You maybe do a 25-year mortgage, but you renew it every 5 years. So with local government borrowing, when you're doing long-term debt, they'll lock it in for 10 years, and then it's opened up at the end of 10 years, and you have to then refinance the balance of the loan owing at that point for the remaining 10-year period. So there are opportunities to perhaps capitalize a little bit on some interest rate opportunities that may present themselves in the next couple of years as if interest rates start to come down. The risk on that, though, again, is they could go up too, but with the signaling from the Bank of Canada, I would recommend just waiting it out a little bit to see where they go in the next 12 to 18 months period.
Thank you. Back to the corporate officer.
Yes. Another question regarding the open reservoir. Most of the water we need during the summer when water is scarce is to water our gardens, and this only requires gray water. Forgive me if this has already been answered, but is there a way to tap into this massive amount of water to feed our gardens in the summer? It's tough to accept being on stage 4, knowing there's basically a lake sitting behind us. This would certainly help with the demand for water from King Edward Bay or Bowen Bay.
Maybe to Mr. Edwards.
Unfortunately, there's no way to tap into that reservoir without compromising the health and safety of all those that are connected to it. So unless that water from the reservoir goes through a proper treatment facility with filtration, we wouldn't be able to use it.
Thank you. And another question, Sophie?
Yes, what effort has been made to determine whether the new Stewart well, which is in close proximity to the King Edward Bay Reservoir, could be a new and meaningful supply?
We are looking at that, and that is a very viable option that we're keen to explore further.
Okay. Any other questions from the chat?
Yes. This is from someone who hasn't asked a question yet. From someone who recently signed on. Can staff confirm that all other potential funding sources have been exhausted, including development cost charges? If any of these works are being driven by growth or infrastructure is being sized to accommodate future demand, I would think that development cost charges should be considered.
We don't have a development cost charge on these utilities, and so there is no development cost charge reserve established. It's entirely possible to consider creating a development cost charge. However, we don't think we would generate any sufficient funds through the development of a DCC anytime soon to help offset the cost. But with certainty, any new property, if there were subdivisions, would be charged appropriate fees to join. there really is only one large property in the neighborhood that has the potential to be subdivided to a number of smaller properties, and to be further subdivided to many properties would require rezoning. And I think given the current state of things, we would be very cautious about that, and that any kind of subdivision or rezoning for that large property would require the provision of ample water that would be brought into the equation here. And we'd be looking to maximize that, not only just the water contribution, but the contribution to the entire water system, and perhaps other amenities that may be appropriate.
Thank you. Any other questions from the chat?
Yes, there's one that's speaking to the financing. Would there be an option for a resident to pay the whole of their share up front as a lump sum?
They certainly can. It's a process called commuting your debt. And what happens is, at the time that the final debt amount is calculated and apportioned equally among all of the properties, we would do a present value calculation of the series of payments over the 30-year mark, and any property owner who wished to be exempt from the parcel tax could pay that present value amount to the municipality at that time, and they would be exempt.
Thank you. Just looking at the time, maybe one more question, if there's one that hasn't been asked yet before moving on to the recommendations. Councillor Fast.
I have one, and apologies if I'm missing something here, but I started meetings on Zoom at 9 o'clock this morning, so I may start to lose the fade out a little bit. I'm wondering, I'm looking at the report from staff that came to council before in November, page 3 of 6. Phase 2 talks about replacement of the remaining undersized water mains. I'm wondering why it's characterized as undersized when I haven't heard anybody calling for increased flow or more higher demand or pushing more water. So I'm wondering why is it called undersized, or am I missing something here? I don't know if anybody can answer that.
It truly is a question for the engineer.
Okay.
I do. It truly
Okay.
is a question for the engineer.
That's fine. I'll look back through my notes and maybe I've asked it before. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, would I be able to respond?
Yes, absolutely.
The undersized water main, Sue Allen, it's undersized for fire flow.
Oh,
Has nothing to do with drinking water.
thank you.
So if fire flow is not a priority, you get my point. You don't need to replace those lines.
Thank you. I was just checking. I'm going, what was that again? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have a hand up, but left the frame.
Mr. Mayor, I also see a Jonathan.
That could be me,
has a
Liam.
hand
This
up
is
for a bit.
yeah. Hi, Liam.
Hi, Jonathan.
I'm gonna back up Trevor on his, again, going back to the reservoir. You say, it's really expensive for a treatment plant. What does really expensive mean? Like, is it more than $3 million? You probably don't have the answer right now, but it's a viable. I mean, what Trevor's saying is reasonable. That's the word. if we could pull it from the reservoir, I mean, that's where things went south back in the early 2000s, is when we couldn't pull it from there anymore. So I know you say it's expensive, but I guess what I'd like to hear at some point, not right now, is how expensive. Because yeah, I mean, like Trevor says, then, you know, Bowen Bay, we don't have to worry about Bowen Bay, King Edward Bay, and the whole, everybody can do what they want. And there's a huge catchment there for water, like way more than we would probably need. It's a shame that it's basically just running down into the ocean. So, like Trevor, I know you guys have done some great planning on this. Like Patrick's done huge planning, and obviously, you know, I'm from Bluewater, so I'm all for it. But if there was another option, I think that needs to be on the table. I'm done.
I will.
Yep.
I will see if that has been explored from a costing perspective. Obviously, as you mentioned, I don't have numbers for tonight.
Chair Dufty.
And we can follow up with Patrick and yourself as well, Liam, in regard to that, because we have had discussions about the open reservoir. But referencing back to the Bluewater fact sheet, we were taken off the open reservoir by a Vancouver Coastal Health Authority back in 2012 when the interconnection with King Edward Bay was stabilized. And up until that point, we were actually drinking out of that open water reservoir in the winter months. And then once it became a little bit too grungy and probably didn't meet the requirements for potable drinking, we then moved on to the Bluewater wells for the remainder of the summer into the fall until the rainy season showed up again. That went on for decades of that cycle. So just to provide a bit of a history in regard to that, but it would be good to work with Patrick on an alternative solution for out of the box thinking that we continue to promote.
Thank you, Chair. And then Ms. Watson, did you have a reply?
Really just an added comment when we're speaking about the reservoir, an added cost, there's the issue of the mixing of the surface water and well water, but the other cost around it too is the maintenance and the operation and maintenance plan, and quite a significant capital cost to upgrade things to make sure that it's safe and in accordance with regulations, dam regulations, things like that. So there's I know that Patrick's mentioned it before, so it's something else we should also get him to weigh in on, is why that's not a viable solution apart from just mixing the water.
Thank you. And last question, Lisa Beck.
It's Tony here. I thank you for letting me speak. I would like to just make this obvious to everyone that we need to come to a consensus of which direction we're going to go forward with and make it happen and come to a happy medium here in reference to Bluewater itself. There are a couple of things that we actually never put in perspective with the existing system we have right now. For instance, if we had an earthquake, we could have a massive problem with leaks everywhere. I would prefer that we just go forward and put a plan together with, at the bare minimum, upgrading our water lines in the Bluewater area, however it gets done, or whatever is the best plan. And then at that moment, once that is all taken care of, then at least we won't have to worry about some of those problems. And then going forward from that, hopefully we'll have the consensus with King Edward Bay or Bowen Bay to have a little confidence in our neighbors.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's been a fairly robust question and answer period, and I would, just looking at the time and giving us maybe the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, is coming back to the original intent of this meeting, which was referring the matter of the loan authorization bylaw to the committee of the whole and the joint chairs. And the recommendation on the agenda, which I think is worthwhile reading out, which I'll do, but just to come back to some of the pieces that we've talked about, and really, I think, honoring the opinions that have been shared by the community, the expertise that's been provided to us by the local advisory committees, the work that's been done with the chairs in the neighborhoods and talking to residents, and you know, even by councillors who have been stopped on the street and who have gone out into communities themselves to hear what is going on. There are a lot of issues at play here. There's historical issues that this has been, you know, I'm relatively new to the island compared to some of the longstanding issues that have been happening here, but they have been going on for a long time. There is, I believe, a highlighted sense of urgency, even though we're into the winter season now, that we will be crunched again by the fall, that there is some action that is needed to be taken. So the recommendation before us is, whereas there is insufficient supply of water in the Bluewater Park local service area to meet the demand, and whereas the long-term sustainability of the aquifer and the wells in the King Edward Bay local service area are a high priority, and whereas there is surplus capacity within the Bowen Bay local service area to supply Bluewater Park with additional water, and whereas an upgrade to wells in both the Bluewater Park and Bowen Bay local service areas, combined with replacement of water mains in the Bluewater Park local service area, will alleviate the water supply shortage and provide protection to the King Edward Bay wells. Therefore, be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw number 595/2022, which authorizes the borrowing of blank in capital funds to upgrade the wells and replace the water mains, be read a first, second, and third time at its meeting on December 12th, 2022. And in that, the big flexibility here, just to draw the attention of the chairs, this is a joint meeting, the chairs do have a vote on this in addition to council, is that amount. So the original amount recommended was $1.7 million. We've heard figures of 2.4 or 3.1 or even higher. And I guess what I'll open the floor to either a motion or perhaps some discussion from both councillors and the joint chairs is, what is the appetite for action here at this point? Councillor Wake.
Thank you. It occurs to me that the most important thing we need to do here is actually to activate the loan, and we're arguing quite a bit over what the amount should be, but if I understand it right, we don't have to draw down. We're just going for the amount we're going to approve. So my thought would be, why don't we go for the 3.1 million, and then because it's going to be a 6-month process before we even get that, we get the referendum and move forward. We're going to need, no matter what we do here with any of these solutions, we're going to need that money. So, based on the quality of the conversation we've had tonight, I think we should be able to come to a reasonable consensus in how we're going to spend it. So I'd be prepared for discussion to make the motion that we put the 3.1 number in that resolution.
Okay, so it's so moved. The recommendation is so moved in the amount of 3.1 million. Is there a seconder for that motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Saunders. So the floor is open to discussion by both council and the joint chairs. Councillor Morse.
So been listening to everything. There's still, I think, some unanswered questions. And so the idea of borrowing the 3.1 appeals to me on the basis of we don't know if the Bowen Bay wells can support what the draw might be from Bluewater. We haven't ascertained what has caused the problem with the existing Bowen Bay well. King Edward Bay wells were supposed to be able to produce more than they are producing. We would do construction borrowing, if I'm understanding Kristen Watson's comments. So we would only draw the money down as we needed it. And then we could turn it into long-term borrowing down the road. And if we needed to drill another well after replacing the pipes, then by borrowing 3.1, there is the money there for Bluewater to drill a well. I think there's been a few questions asked, or I don't know what it would cost to do the surface water system. What's needed to fix up the reservoir, or what's needed for costs of treatment. And I guess it's a very quick and dirty to have a look at comparables. There is the comparison numbers that were done for Eagle Cliff versus, what it would cost them to connect Cove Bay versus doing it themselves. So, and I think that was to build an actual, maybe, yeah. So it might not be that difficult to compare, but if we went for the referendum on the basis of the 3.1, we've got some wiggle room and we don't have to draw it if we don't need it.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Chair O'Donnell.
Thank you. Just thinking of timing, I've worked in my career as a developer of many major projects, so I start thinking of timing and things as they move forward. But one of the things actually came up that Liam Edwards suggested earlier, that we wanted to get this work done as quickly as possible, and hopefully by the time the high demand period arrived. But really, probably we cannot work on the wells between May 1st and October 31st, because when you're working on a well and doing work, it's not functioning. And you could also have a problem with the well. So we don't want any of our wells to go offline in the July, August, September period. And because, of course, at that point, Bowen Bay doesn't have a backup line. So I suggest it'll probably, once everyone sits down and figures it out, they'll realize that the work on the wells, unfortunately, is going to probably occur after October 31st next year. And then as to the going forward on the 3.1, but not specifying, I think part of the rationale of the timing was after the bylaw was approved, and people would need to know what the work would be done while it's being approved. After it was approved, and while we were waiting for Victoria to approve the borrowing, that the design work would start, and possibly even the tendering, because the design work could take 2 or 3 months. And then tendering these days, trying to get trades to respond, etc., could be 2 months. And then you go through a tender pre-qualification bidding period. So I think we need to get on with it. There's no doubt about it. But realistically, we're probably not doing work on the Bowen Bay wells, if you go forward with that idea, until after October of next year. You could start the pipe repair in the summer, because when they're doing pipe repairs, they run temporary pipes. You've seen them on the ground, so that everyone still has water. So that can be done at any time.
Thank you, Chair O'Donnell. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. So following up on what Chair O'Donnell has just said, and listening to the conversation tonight, I think we do have a little bit of consensus that we haven't acknowledged. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard all 3 chairs suggest that we needed more supply, and drilling wells in areas perhaps proximal to the King Edward Bay tank that we think are going to be productive would be a good idea. And if we postponed, as John has suggested, if we said let's not do the hookup and the big work on the Bowen Bay wells for now, let's see if we can get some new wells going. Because if we can, then as all the chairs have pointed out, then we've sort of taken the pressure off the immediate problem. And we've also, perhaps, if those wells do produce, then we can forego that $715,000 to upgrade the Bowen Bay system.
Thank you, Councillor Wake. Councillor Fast?
Thank you, Chair. Or thank you, Mayor Leonard, I guess. I'm wondering if we can get an indication from the LAC chairs about the probability of a referendum passing or failing in this era of tough times, and affordability is high on people's radar. And I'm not as familiar with the neighborhoods out there, and and the community. Obviously, you're closest to them. I'm thinking maybe we should just go for the 1.770. It's more like 1.8, I guess, million to do those high priority projects. And would the referendum have a higher chance of succeeding? Is that a factor even?
And perhaps just a point of information to the CFO, if 3.1 is authorized for borrowing, does the entire amount need to be borrowed and thus be applied as a per property tax at that point? Or is it possible to have the approval and then borrow as receive the money as needed?
No, the wording in the bylaw would be up to, so it's a ceiling limit that you could borrow. And given where we're at with interest rates, we wouldn't want to borrow that much, or sorry, lock it in at that rate initially. We'd want to just sort of hold off and just see where interest rates go, given that we do have that leeway to borrow for a 5-year period without locking the rate in, and make interest only payments or a portion of interest and principal. It's very flexible for the first 5 years.
Okay, thank you. So if assent is given, then you do need to borrow the 3.1 within the 5 years if you're going to borrow the whole amount, but you can borrow it in stages within that time period. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. You can do a temporary borrowing and take it in installments, much like Councillor Moore said, almost like a construction loan. You can draw it down.
Thank you. Chair Dufty?
I'll let Liam go first.
Oh, I was just going to make that statement that, yeah, you can just draw it down as you need it. And then if you don't need the full 3.1, you lock in at whatever amount you use.
Thank you.
And I just want to add in support of Councillor Fast's question in regard to the appetite for the 1.77 or 1.8 versus the 3.1 right now. It's a tough thing to gauge with the community. I think we could get it across the finish line with the 1.8 million currently. But if we were to go for the 3.1 million, we would have to craft something in the referendum to indicate to the Bluewater homeowners that this is a stepped funding process, and it's not necessarily all, but we're creating a loan structure for us for the future that would take us into phase 2. So I think we could craft something that would be an appetite for the community to support, but we'd have to work pretty hard together on that one.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Wake, I see that you had your hand up. As the mover, you can make a material reply. Did you have a material reply, or did you want Councillor Saunders to go first?
Oh, Councillor Saunders can go first. I forgot to take my hand down. Sorry.
Okay.
I just want
Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to comment briefly on Councillor Wake's comments there about, and I understand the concern that everyone has, and around this, but the comments about, well, why don't we, let's first go drill more wells. We can borrow water, or we borrow water. We can borrow money, and if I'm misparaphrasing you, Councillor Wake, I apologize, but I understood you saying that we could, for borrowing the money, then let's focus on that part early on. The concern I would have with that approach, while I certainly think we do need to look at supply over the long term, the concern I'd have with that approach is that we don't have any assurances of any kind, even a percentage assurance of how successful we might be in that attempt to find more water. Whereas borrowing the money and doing the infrastructure improvements, we know what the result of that will be, or at least it's much more sure than the look for water approach. I think we're going to need to look for water down the road, but we've got an immediate problem here, and it has to be addressed now, not a year from now, when we conclude that, well, we looked for wells and we found one, but it wasn't good enough, or whatever I also understand we could look for wells and solve the problem within 3 months, but we just don't know, and we do need to address the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. And maybe as a point of information, just over to Chair Dufty, because I know that the search for wells has occurred in the past. And did you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, so in 2019 in May, when, well, prior to that, upwards of even into 2018, the water systems in Bluewater Park and King Edward Bay were drastically being depleted. So there was an emergency reaction by BIM staff to drill right in the middle of the existing Mutiny Lane well field, and came up, the 640-foot well came up dry, and the shallow surface well did have some viability, but it's got a lot of strings attached to it as far as treatment is concerned. But I also wanted just to bring up that the LAC in Bluewater Park has approved to dip into the reserves to start the preliminary design process and get out to the wells in Bowen Bay and Bluewater Park to work to find out what's going on with those existing wells, that the well pumps that aren't working properly, and of course some of it would be linked with Bowen Bay and their costs for maintenance, that kind of thing, from the basic. But Bluewater Park wants to start the initiative to get going on the conceptual design of how this optimization is going to work. So we've taken the initial approval steps to start that process. And then it's just a matter of coming up with the rest of the monies to continue down the road we want to go.
Thank you, Chair Dufty. Councillor Morse?
I think Rob answered part of my questions, but there's still the unknown about the Bowen Bay well and why it's failed. And there's also, I guess, the comment that Jim Taylor made about, is there already an interconnection line between Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay? And so why not use that and see if the wells can cope with that extra demand before spending all the money for the everything else?
Chair Thomas Peter.
Thanks. But just to answer that line works in one direction.
Yes, agreed.
It doesn't come back this way. It goes only south from King Edward Bay to Bowen Bay.
Thank you, Chair.
And that's due to elevation change.
Any other debate or questions from council and chairs on the motion to resolve the authorization of the borrowing bylaw up to 3.1 million is what's on the floor right now. Councillor Fast.
Just if by consent, we can change the word after, in the last line, it says be read a first, second, and third time at the council meeting on December 12th instead of its. just to make it clear that it's council that will decide, not the committee.
Oh,
of the
yes.
whole. So just to
Okay,
change the
so-
word "it's" to council. Can we do that by
At
consent?
council meeting, sure, at regular council meeting. So the, just to be clear, there is an amendment being proposed by Councillor Fast to strike "it's" after third time or a third time at and replace it with council meeting December 12th, 2022. Without objection. Seeing none, the resolution is amended. Thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Morse?
A clarification question. So there's no approval in this motion to actually do anything other than borrow the money. I mean, it has capital funds to upgrade the wells and replace the water mains. So by passing this, we're saying that's what we're going to do. Rather than say improvements to the water systems to increase water supply.
That is as I read it in the preamble of the bylaw, yes.
Well, it's in the, therefore, we resolved the borrowing of dollars in capital funds to upgrade the wells and replace the water mains.
There's all those whereases.
Well, the whereases aren't the resolution.
Yeah, so and it refers to, just as a clarification, the resolution refers to the loan authorization bylaw 595, and that I believe that the language of upgrading wells and replacing water mains is in the preamble whereas of that bylaw.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess the other question was, I'm surprised that Chair O'Donnell hasn't raised this one, but there's a whereas about the integrity of the sustainability of the aquifer and the wells in King Edward Bay. I think you might want to say in King Edward Bay and Bowen Bay. It's, or just the integrity of the aquifer and the wells in the three water systems. Because we can't just be worried about the integrity and sustainability of one. We've got to be worried about the sustainability and integrity of the whole, of all three.
Maybe just as that was directed at Chair O'Donnell, did you want to reply, Chair?
Morse is quite right, although depending on the motion, if you go forward with an option that doesn't involve a connection to Bowen Bay, then I guess still is, obviously we're concerned, but it doesn't belong in the whereas.
Councillor Fast?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if, just for clarity all round, I understand that the words up to 3.1 will be in the bylaw, but could we add the words up to after borrowing of?
Yeah.
So that it's nice and clear for everybody that what this committee of the whole is presenting to council is borrowing of up to 3.1 million. So can we do that by consent? I heard the words earlier.
Yeah.
And that would make it consistent with the actual language of the bylaw, which authorizes borrowing of up to 3.1 million.
That's what I understood from our CFO. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. You can, the wording of the loan authorization bylaw will be up to.
Great. So let's add those words in after borrowing of. Thank you, Sophie.
Okay. So the amendment is after in the resolution after authorizes the borrowing of to add the words up to. And if there's no objection, that small edit will be adopted. Seeing none, the amendment carries. Councillor Wake.
I'd just like to acknowledge Chair Dufty's comment, which I think is important. Except now I've just forgotten it. That we're think it was to do with, it was on the question of what are the chances of 3.1 versus 1.7 passing. And, I know what it was. And Chair Dufty indicated that if we were gonna be able to sell that, and I presume he means if Bluewater was going to be able to sell that to Bluewater residents, then we'd probably have to work together on that. And I guess from where I'm seeing it, the amount, to me, it's not about the amount that we're borrowing. It's about the amount that we might need. And if we did need it and we only had the 1.7, then we've got to go through this whole process again. And a number of people have commented on the challenges with that. And we know we don't have a lot of time here. So, yeah, I'm just thinking it would be better if we had the 3.1. And one other point I wanted to make is this doesn't rule out with the 3.1 perhaps being able to allocate some money, some funds into studying the reservoir solution. And what I'm thinking of there is I get it that it can't be plugged in to the potable water system, but has anybody looked at the feasibility of just a gigantic irrigation system, which would require, could be done with flexible pipe, not too deep a bury, and the kind of thing you put in your garden, but imagine it through a neighborhood. And if we could do all the garden watering in Bluewater from that reservoir, that would go a long way to making things better.
Thank you, Councillor Wake. Any other discussion on our
Call the
motion,
question.
Councillor Fest?
I'd like to vote.
Call the question?
Yeah. I
so,
see, but I see a hand up. Yeah.
Councillor
Just how
Morse?
crucial is the December 12th for timing? Is there timelines with Metro or anything like that we're having to meet if we were going to do the 5-year construction type loan?
We would not be able to get funding before the end of May using the alternative approved, the negative petition process, and likely not until the end of June if it had to go to referendum, if the method of assent was chosen as referendum.
Okay, but I guess my question is December, forget that time frame for when we could get the money. Is there any other time frame that December 12th is crucial to?
No, it's about what the earliest potential date could be to access the funding.
So it's nothing to do with having to go through Metro approval cycles like the fall and spring borrowings. Okay.
Security issuing would probably happen in the fall. Go through the Metro pool borrowing in the fall.
That wouldn't happen until you wanted to lock it in at the final rate and start turning it into long-term debenture debt with regular annual principal and interest payments.
Right. But so the December 12th is really about trying to get to construction.
Is anybody going to bid on a contract when they know we don't know whether we're going to get the money or not?
We wouldn't, I wouldn't go to tender until we had.
So we wouldn't be going to tender until the end of June.
Depending on the method of elector assent. It's either May or June. And then so some earlier comments about preparing.
Not working on the wells in the summer.
Preparing the tender documents in parallel with the assent process. So that once assent was received, you could go to the market right away.
I guess I'm just trying to weigh in my mind a chance to fine tune the resolution a little bit because I'm uncomfortable. We don't really know. The wording in the whereas will alleviate the water supply shortage. It could alleviate, or it should, but we don't know for sure until we've tested that Bowen Bay well to know what's caused the problem. So I'm not against the borrowing of the money. It's just I'm not comfy with the precision of some of the words.
And was there a specific precision that you'd like to improve, Councillor Morse?
Well, yeah, it's we don't have any wiggle room in the wording and capital funds to upgrade the wells and replace the water mains. I mean, even having the two "thes" in there is, you know, upgrade or source wells, replace water mains. We don't have the wiggle room. If we find out the Bowen Bay well isn't good, then they're going to have to drill another well. And yeah, there's just too many unknowns that we haven't got the wiggle room for the wording in the resolution. That's why I was asking about the timing, whether this could wait to January. If we had general agreement on, you know, going ahead or giving it first reading so that, you know, we could tidy the wording up.
It is possible. So just in my understanding of the process and order, it is, so this is the resolution that's coming out of the committee of the whole. So it's not binding upon council at this point. And effectively the resolution is to recommend the loan authorization bylaw number 595. So there's nothing that would prevent removing the language in this resolution of upgrade the wells and replace the water mains, and just address the capital funds and then deal or dispose of the language around well upgrades and water main distribution in the actual bylaw itself.
So just stop this, authorize the borrowing of 3.1 million in capital funds to enable.
To be read a first, second, and third time at its meeting on December 12th.
Yeah, or to enable sourcing additional water for Bluewater Park.
Which authorized the borrowing of 3.1 million in capital funds to, what's that language you just used, Councillor Morse?
I just said, just so they know that it was, well, it's Bluewater Park that's going to be doing the borrowing. So maybe we don't, just to clarify that it's in capital funds to enable sourcing additional water, period.
Okay. Capital funds to enable sourcing additional water in Bluewater Park.
Sourcing and supplying additional water.
Okay. Councillor Wake?
I don't think it's in Bluewater Park, it's for Bluewater Park.
That's right, yeah.
Well, it's, yeah, okay.
So we're getting down the road here of an amendment. Sophie, do you have written what was proposed?
Yes, so I can read it currently as the proposed amendment. Therefore be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw number 595/2022, which authorizes the borrowing of up to 3.1 million in capital funds to enable sourcing and supplying of additional water for Bluewater Park, be read a first, second, and third time at the council meeting on December 12th, 2022.
Does that sound amenable to you, Councillor Morse?
Yeah. Can I play around with a couple of the whereases? The third one.
Let's dispose of this. Let's dispose of this one first because this one would need passage, and I believe.
Okay, so we
Chair
can
O'Donnell
play
has his
around.
hand up.
We're not sending the whereases in as they are then.
Not just yet. No, right now we're examining that the replacement of upgrade the wells,
I
replace
thought you
the
were
water
getting
mains.
ready to call the question.
No,
Okay.
no. So just on that amendment as read by the corporate officer, are there any objections to adopting that amendment? Seeing none, the amendment carries or passes.
Okay.
And
So
then
I
Chair
just-
O'Donnell, you did have your hand up there. Was there something that you wish to reply to?
Yes, it was just to perhaps deal with Councillor Morse's concern about, which of course the Bowen Bay residents share as well, is the state of our well. You could add a whereas that states that the boring bylaw won't actually be presented to the Bluewater Park residents until such time as the investigation has been done and to determine that the Bowen Bay well #1 is a healthy well. And at the same time they do that, they're planning to replace the pump, which we've already agreed to pay for, but we need to get that well investigated, cameraed, and checked. And that way, then when there's fulsome discussion in Bluewater Park about this, at least that question's been answered.
Is that a timing thing? Water thing.
I think they could do that work in 2 months, or sorry, in once they get them over here, they probably have the answer in 4 to 6 weeks.
And maybe I will refer that question out to our CAO about the timing of something like that, or if that's even possible to answer at this meeting.
Yeah, I think Chair O'Donnell's right. Once we get them over here, it's not they'll have to do analysis and take it back and probably turn around in a month or so.
Okay.
I
Councilor
guess
Getty did have
oh, yeah, she did.
her hand up. Councilor Getty?
I've been at those trust meetings all day, so I'm beginning to lose it, and very hard to keep track. So if we've made all these amendments to the resolution, are we now going back to change the whereas clauses?
They need to be
Because-
consistent.
How about if we just, before we lose our brains, mine, I'm speaking for myself here, can we pass this as is and fiddle with the whereases in the week before the actual council meeting? Because I know it's only the first, second, and third time that we'll be reading it anyway. There's still a fourth time yet to come, so there's some process ahead. I'm just concerned with, now we've done the meaty part, we're ready to vote on it, and to go back into the whereas could change what we decide about the meaty part that we've just discussed.
My apologies to the group, but we've been 12 hours in Zoom meetings, so.
Yeah.
I haven't had a fun day either.
That is absolutely fair, and I think it is worth noting, just from a process standpoint, is that the whereases, when they come back to council, it's the whereases are coming from committee. It's actually will be read and voted on at council. Will be the bylaw document in it. So the whereases, and it's also probably worth noting that a few of those whereases came out of the local advisory committee meetings themselves.
Well, I don't have any problem with the first two whereases. I do have a problem with the very flat statement in the third one, because we don't know now with the Bowen Bay well whether there is surplus capacity. So you could change is to the whereas there is potential surplus capacity, and that could supply. And then the very flat, that the replacement of the water mains will alleviate the water supply shortage. And provide protection to the King Edward Bay wells. But it also has an upgrade to the wells. So it's just, it's very flat statement of will alleviate rather than should alleviate.
So I'm understanding it as two potential amendments. So in the third clause, whereas there is potential surplus capacity, so the addition of potential after there is.
Yeah,
And the second amendment being a striking of, in the fourth clause, the word will after Bluewater Park local service area to could alleviate or could or should alleviate the water supply. So that would make the language slightly more flexible. With the whereas is reading, therefore, that whereas there is surplus capacity within the Bowen Bay local service area, or there is potential surplus capacity within the boat. Yep. To supply Bluewater Park with additional water.
Or would that be, I thought that was potential surplus capacity within the Bowen Bay local service area that could supply? Is that where that could?
It's potential.
By putting in the word potential, I don't think you need that could.
Okay, thank you. I've got it in the wrong place then. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
No problem. So we're adding the proposal is to add the word potential before surplus and to strike will with should.
Where's
any
the word
objections
will?
to the will is after in the fourth clause after Bluewater Park local service area.
Third line.
Prior to alleviate.
Oh, thank you.
So should alleviate the water supply shortage. Any objections to the amendments as stated? Seeing none, the amendments are made. And we're back to the main motion. Any further comments on the main motion?
We're putting 3.1 in there.
Yeah,
that was as the as the motion reads now.
Yeah.
And yeah. Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. All in favor of the main motion, be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommends the Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw number 595, 2022, which authorizes the borrowing of 3.1 million in capital funds. Up to, sorry, my apologies. I'm also at the end of my evening as well. Can I get the corporate officer to actually read off the motion? Is a more appropriate way to dispose of this?
Yes, so that's therefore be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw number 595, 2022, which authorizes the borrowing of up to $3.1 million in capital funds to enable sourcing and supplying of additional water for Bluewater Park, be read a first, second, and third time at the council meeting on December 12th, 2022.
All right, all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. Thank you, motion carries.
Is that unanimous?
It was unanimous. I didn't see, yeah, it was unanimous. So the implications here, just for the public on the call and anyone that is watching this, the recommendation now will come before council on December 12th to do a first, second, and third reading of the bylaw. There still are opportunities for public comment between now and then. I'm sure that the chairs may receive some feedback. I know that councilors will receive some feedback as well. At that meeting on the 12th, there will also be a public comment session before the meeting if anybody wishes to appear before council. So thank you very much. This has been a long meeting. I think, ultimately productive, and we got somewhere in it. And I appreciate the candor with which the public showed up, the respect that was shown to council, staff, committees, and public as well is very appreciated. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Saunders. Seeing no objections, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.